She had 3 silver coins left in the world. No pack, no home, no wolf. The rejection brand on her neck was still raw, and the town that had watched her fall hadn't looked away fast enough to pretend they hadn't enjoyed it. She was not supposed to have anything left to give. Then she saw the wolf. And something in her chest, stubborn, stupid, and completely beyond reason, refused to stay quiet. This is the story of what those 3 coins bought her, and what it cost everyone who underestimated what she was. Chapter 1. The Last 3 Coins. The alley behind the grain merchant's stall smelled like old straw and something worse, but Noreen Wilson had slept in worse places in the 2 days since her life had ended. She sat with her back against the stone wall, knees drawn up, and counted the coins in her palm for the 4th time that morning. 3 silver. Not because counting them would multiply them, but because the act of counting was the last thing she still had control over. 3. The same 3 that had been there this morning, and yesterday morning, and the morning she'd walked out of the Duskfall Pack's territory with nothing but the clothes on her back and the burn of 63 pairs of eyes watching her go. She closed her fist around the coins and listened to the market square waking up around her. Vendors calling their wares, cartwheels grinding on cobblestone, somewhere a child laughing, the sound bright and careless in a way that felt personally offensive. 2 days ago, Darren McCoy, her mate, the man she had bound herself to at 17, the man she had healed and fed and loved for 6 years, had stood in the center of the Duskfall gathering circle and said the words, "I reject you, Noreen, fully and finally. You are no wolf of mine." He hadn't even looked sorry. That was the part she kept returning to. He'd looked relieved. The pack elder had sealed the rejection with a suppressor brand pressed to the side of her neck. A small iron disc heated in ceremony fire burned into her skin to lock away her wolf spirit until such time as another mate claimed her, or she petitioned the Alpha Council for a formal dissolution. The elder had said the words in the old language, and Noreen had stood perfectly still because she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. She'd flinched later, alone, when she was a mile down the road and her legs had finally stopped working. Now she sat in an alley counting 3 coins and listening to the market and trying to decide if she was angry enough to get up yet. She was deciding she probably wasn't when she heard the crowd noise change. Not louder, uglier. That specific shift in a crowd's sound when entertainment tips into cruelty, when laughter has an edge to it. She'd grown up in a pack. She knew that sound. Noreen stayed where she was for 10 full seconds. Then she got up. The auction block in the center of Millhaven Market was used for livestock on Tuesdays and debts on Fridays. Today was Friday. She pushed through the gathered crowd to see what was on the platform, expecting a debtor's chair, a man in irons, something commonplace and grim. What she found stopped her moving entirely. It was a wolf. Not shifted, the creature was in animal form, which meant whoever had put it up here had somehow prevented it from shifting back, which was not a small thing to do and not a kind thing to do. It was large, even by wolf standards. Silver-gray coat matted with old blood and something darker. An iron muzzle bolted around its jaw, the kind used on feral animals, the kind that left marks. Its legs were hobbled with chains so short it could barely stand, and it stood anyway, because apparently that was the kind of wolf it was. The crowd around the platform was entertained. A boy near the front had a handful of pebbles and was throwing them one at a time, aiming for the wolf's hindquarters. A woman to Noreen's left was explaining to her friend that it had been caught raiding a sheep pen 3 towns east, that it had killed 2 of the shepherd's dogs, that wolves like this one were why the western roads weren't safe anymore. The auctioneer, a thin man with a voice built for carrying, was calling out a starting bid of 5 silver and getting no takers. 4 silver then. 4 silver for a wolf this size, think of the use. Strong back once it shifts, assuming anyone can break it. 3 silver and it's practically a gift. Noreen looked at the wolf. It was not looking at the crowd. It was not looking at the pebble-throwing boy or the auctioneer or anything in front of it. Its eyes. She could see them now, gold layered strangely over gray, not quite the right color for any wolf she'd encountered, were moving in slow, methodical arcs. Scanning. Not panicked, not despairing, calculating. The wolf was cataloging the square, counting exits, assessing distances, doing, in short, exactly what she had been doing in an alley 20 minutes ago, except with chains on its legs and a muzzle bolted to its jaw and a crowd throwing pebbles at it. The suppressor mark on her neck pulsed once, oddly, like a second heartbeat. 2 silver, the auctioneer said, desperation creeping in. 2 silver, someone take the beast before I have to— What happens if no one bids? Noreen asked, loudly enough to carry. The auctioneer looked at her with the expression of a man who had not expected that question from a woman who looked like she'd slept in an alley. Sundown, he said. The beast is destroyed. The crowd made a sound that was almost approval. Noreen looked at the wolf again. It had stopped scanning. It was looking at her now, those strange, layered eyes fixed on her face with an attention that was not animal and was not quite human and was entirely unsettling. She opened her fist and looked at her 3 coins. You cannot, she told herself. You have no food. You have no shelter that's actually yours. You have nowhere to put a wolf, and no reason to want one, and this is the stupidest thought you have had in a lifetime of occasionally stupid thoughts. She started walking away. She got 4 steps. She stopped, stood there with her back to the platform, and her jaw tight and her 3 coins in her palm. I know, she said, to herself, quietly enough that no one nearby could hear. I know. I'm doing it anyway. She turned around. 2 silver, she said, pushing to the front of the crowd and slapping the coins on the auctioneer's table before the sensible part of her brain could catch up. That's what you said. 2 silver. The auctioneer stared at her. The crowd stared at her. She was aware she was not an impressive sight. Travel-worn coat, shadow under her eyes, the distinctive suppressor brand visible above her collar. Miss, the auctioneer started, with the particular tone of a man trying to talk someone out of a decision while simultaneously wanting to close a sale. This is a feral wolf, unclaimed, no pack mark, no registration. Which is why it's 2 silver. She held his gaze. I'm a healer. Or I was. Something tight moved through her chest. I know what I'm looking at. I'll take it. A pause. The auctioneer looked at the coins, looked at the wolf, looked back at her. He pocketed the coins. She turned to face what she'd just bought. The wolf was watching her, still calculating, still with that unnerving intelligence in its strange gold-gray eyes. She'd expected something. Relief, maybe, or the animal recognition of a rescuer. Something that made this feel less insane than it was. What she got was a stare so flat and assessing that it made the hair on the back of her arms stand up. She crossed to the platform and crouched down to look at the hobble chains, and felt the wolf's attention tracking her hands, her movements, her face. I'm going to undo these, she said quietly, because she had always talked to animals, and she didn't know why she'd stop now. And then, we're going to walk out of this square together and find somewhere to put you, and then you are going to let me look at whatever is wrong with you. Yes? The wolf stared at her. Right, she said. Yes, it is. She undid the hobbles, stood up, gestured toward the alley at the market's edge, the way out, the open space beyond the crowd. The wolf did not move. She gestured again, more pointedly. The wolf sat down. The crowd, still watching, began to laugh. Noreen looked at the wolf sitting calmly in its chains in the middle of the market square, with an iron muzzle on its face, looking back at her with an expression of complete and sovereign indifference, and she breathed in once through her nose. I just spent everything I had on you, she said. The wolf blinked. Everything. It blinked again. She crouched back down, level with those strange eyes, and said, very quietly, so only the wolf could hear, I don't know what you are, but I know what that look is. I wore it myself 2 days ago. So here is what's going to happen. You are going to get up, and you are going to walk with me, and I am going to keep you alive. And one day, when this is over for both of us, you can go wherever you want. But right now you walk. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, the wolf stood up. Chapter 2. A wolf who won't be helped and a woman who won't stop trying. The borrowed shed at the edge of Millhaven belonged to a woman named Josie Friedman, who ran the tallow candle stall 3 rows from the market entrance and had taken one look at Noreen 2 days ago and pressed a key into her hand without being asked. 2 weeks, Josie had said. Then my nephew wants it back for storage. Noreen hadn't argued. 2 weeks was 2 weeks. Now she stood in the doorway of that shed and looked at the wolf, who had followed her through the market and down 3 side streets and along the low path by the mill creek with the quiet, unhurried pace of something that had decided to come, but was not going to pretend it was her idea. She pushed the door open wider, gestured inside. The wolf walked past her without looking at her, which she was choosing to take as progress. Inside, the shed was barely large enough for a cot, a washstand, and whatever dignity Noreen could arrange. She had a tinder box, half a blanket from the market rag pile, a clay pot she'd been using to boil water, and a small bundle of dried herbs she'd kept in her coat pocket out of habit. Healer's habit, the kind that persisted even when you had no one left to heal. She shut the door and turned to find the wolf standing in the center of the small space, looking at everything with that same methodical attention. Walls, ceiling, the single shuttered window, the door she'd just closed. Her face last. "Sit down," she said. "You're bleeding through your back left flank and you've been favoring it since the square." The wolf looked at her flank comment with an expression that, on a human face, would have been mild contempt. "I know you understood that," Noreen said, "so sit." It sat, not with any great compliance, more the way a person sits when they've decided sitting was already what they were going to do. She crouched behind it and pushed the matted coat aside carefully, and what she found made her hands go still. She had trained under the Duskfall pack healer for 4 years before she'd taken over the role herself. She had treated shift wounds and silver burns and the ugly damage that came from territorial disputes. She knew what injury looked like. This was not injury. This was surgery. 4 sites along the wolf's left flank, evenly spaced, methodically placed. Old scarring, white and smooth, from procedures done weeks or months ago. And 1 fresh wound, maybe 3 days old, still seeping. Not a tear or a bite, clean-edged, made by a blade, by someone who knew where to cut. She sat back on her heels and looked at the pattern of scars and felt something cold and certain move through her. Someone had been extracting from this wolf repeatedly, harvesting its blood, specifically the concentrated essence that pooled in a dominant wolf system, the biological marker of alpha rank. On the black market, a single vial of extracted alpha essence sold for more than a healer made in a year. It was used in dominance rituals, in illegal binding ceremonies, in the kind of pack politics that happened in rooms where people didn't write things down. It was also, if done repeatedly, eventually fatal. "Who did this to you?" she asked, though she didn't expect an answer. She got one. Not words. The wolf shifted. Partial, painful, the kind of incomplete shift that happened when something was suppressing the full change. It was a horrible thing to watch, the body trying to become something and being stopped halfway. But she held still and did not look away, because looking away felt like abandonment. What emerged for about 30 seconds was something between larger than the wolf form, shaped vaguely like a man, features blurred at the edges like a sketch not yet finished. One massive hand closed around her wrist, not hard, not threatening, just stopping her. She looked down at the hand on her wrist. She looked up. The eyes, in the half form, were extraordinary. Gold over silver, yes, but up close they had depth to them, layers, like looking at something that had been burning for a very long time. They were fixed on her neck, on the suppressor brand. She watched the expression in those eyes change. The flat calculations softened into something she recognized because she'd felt it herself, in the alley, counting 3 coins. The specific look of a person encountering someone who understands what they're carrying without needing it explained. Then the hand on her wrist turned, slowly, deliberately, and the wolf, the man, showed her his inner wrist. She went very still. A suppressor mark. Burned into the skin of his inner wrist, small and precise and unmistakably deliberate. Not a rejection brand. She knew what those looked like. She was wearing one. This was different, older in its design. A sealing mark, the kind used by pack authorities to lock down a wolf's shift entirely. Someone with significant power had put that mark on him. Someone had stripped his ability to become himself, and then sold him. "Who did this to you?" she asked again, and this time she wasn't sure she was asking about the surgical wounds. The half-form held for another moment, then collapsed back into wolf, the process no less difficult to watch in reverse. He was panting when it was done, exhausted by the effort of even that much. Noreen sat on the floor of the shed next to him and opened her bundle of dried herbs and started working, because that was what she did when she didn't know what else to do. She talked while she worked, not because she expected him to respond, because the silence was too large and talking made her hands steady. "I was a healer," she said, cleaning the fresh wound with boiled water and a strip torn from the rag pile blanket. "For 6 years I was the Duskfall Pack's healer. I was good at it." She pressed the cloth gently against the wound and felt him tense and hold still. "My mate decided he wanted someone else. He could have just said so. It would have been awful, but I would have eventually been fine." She paused. "Instead, he did it in the gathering circle, in front of everyone." The wolf was quiet. "The worst part," she said, "is that I didn't see it coming. I'm a healer. I read people for a living. I read him every day for 6 years and I missed it completely." She tied off the bandaging, makeshift, but it would hold. "That bothers me more than the rest of it, honestly." She sat back, looked at her work, looked at him. He was watching her with those layered eyes, and there was something in them now that hadn't been there in the market square. Not sympathy. She didn't need sympathy and wouldn't have wanted it. Something more like attention. The real kind. The kind that meant what you were saying was being received. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," she said. He held her gaze steadily. "I don't even know your name." He shifted his weight. Then, with the obvious effort of someone working around a constraint, he opened his jaw slightly against the iron muzzle. The auctioneer had removed it before she'd paid. She realized she hadn't even noticed that, and shaped a sound. It came out rough, abraded, like a voice that hadn't been used in a long time. One syllable. "Careful. Kale." She looked at him. "Kale," she repeated. He dipped his head once. "Noreen," she said, and then, because it seemed fair, "But you already knew that, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. She'd seen the way his eyes had moved to her face in the square, the way he'd tracked her through the crowd before she'd spoken, the way he'd looked at her specifically out of 60 people. He held her gaze and said nothing. She filed it away. There would be time for that conversation later, assuming they had a later. She was settling that thought when the sound reached her. Low voices outside, boots on the path, more than one set, moving toward the shed with the particular lack of hurry that meant they knew where they were going and weren't worried about resistance. Kale was already on his feet. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate. "We know you're in there." A man's voice, pack-trained, authority-seasoned. "The wolf you purchased this morning belongs to the Duskfall Alpha. It was taken from our healer's custody without consent. Return it and we'll forget you were involved." Noreen stood very still in the center of the shed. Duskfall, her pack, Darren's pack, the pack that had put a brand on her neck 2 days ago, while 63 people watched and said nothing. Their healer had been the one cutting into Kale. Their healer had been harvesting him. She looked at Kale, who was standing close behind her left shoulder, and the look on his half-visible face, still fighting toward human, still caught between, was not fear and was not desperation. It was the same flat calculation from the market square. He was waiting to see what she would do. Noreen walked to the door, did not open it. "He's mine," she said, loud and clear. "Purchased legally in Millhaven Market in front of 30 witnesses at the auctioneer's declared price. If the Duskfall Pack has a counterclaim, they can bring it to the market magistrate with documentation." She paused. "Come back with the law on your side or don't come back at all." Silence on the other side of the door. Then, "You have until morning to reconsider, rejected." Footsteps retreating. Noreen stood facing the closed door and breathed. She was shaking. She could feel it in her hands, in her jaw. But she was still standing, and the door was still closed, and that was what mattered. Behind her, she heard movement. She turned. Cale had crossed the shed. He lowered himself to sit beside her. Not behind her, not at her feet. Beside her. Level. Present. And then, with a deliberateness that felt like a complete sentence, he rested his head against her shoulder. She stood there with the shake still in her hands and the brand still burning on her neck, and 3 coins lighter than she'd been that morning, and she breathed out slowly. "All right," she said quietly. "All right." Chapter 3. The enemy arrives before she can even rest. She did not sleep. She sat against the shed wall with Cale beside her, and her ears tuned to every sound outside. Wind against the shutter, the mill creek moving, the occasional far-off bark of a domestic dog. And she ran the situation through her mind the way she used to run a diagnosis. Symptoms first, then causes, then what you could actually do about it. Symptoms. 3 Duskfall wolves knew where she was. They would return in the morning with more men or a magistrate, or both. She had no pack protection, no legal standing beyond a market receipt, no money, and no allies in Millhaven except a candlemaker who had given her a shed key out of kindness and would not thank her for bringing pack politics to her door. Causes. She had bought something that belonged to people with more power than her, which had been true of most of her decisions lately. What she could actually do, she had not yet worked that part out. Cale had fallen into something like sleep around midnight. Not restful, she could see the tension in his body even unconscious, the way his breathing hitched whenever a sound came from outside, but sleep nonetheless. She was glad for it. Whatever had been done to him needed rest to begin undoing. She watched the gray light of early morning creep under the door and thought about Josie Friedman, who had given her a key without asking questions. Who would need this shed back in less than 2 weeks? Who did not deserve to have her property connected to whatever this was becoming. She thought about the Duskfall healer's surgical marks on Cale's flank and the suppressor brand on his wrist, and the market auctioneer who had sold him without appearing to know or care what he was selling. She thought about the word rejected, spoken through a door as though it were her name now. By the time the light under the door had gone from gray to pale gold, she had decided on nothing except that she was not opening the door when they came back. They came back at dawn. Not 3 men this time, 5, and she counted their boots from the sound before she stood up. Kyle was awake instantly, on his feet before she was, and the shift in the shed's atmosphere when 5 dominant wolves lined up outside a small space was a physical thing, a pressure against the air. "Open the door, Noreen." A different voice this time, older, flatter. She recognized it. Preston McCann, Duskfall's head enforcer. She had healed a deep shoulder wound for Preston 2 years ago. He had thanked her and brought her dried fish from his hunt share for a month afterward. She wondered if he remembered that. "No," she said. A pause. "This is going to go badly for you if you make it difficult." "It's already going badly for me," she said. "Open doors won't improve that." She heard low murmuring outside, a brief exchange she couldn't parse, then Preston's voice again, quieter, aimed at the door crack. "Listen to me. Whatever you think you're doing, this wolf is not what it looks like. You don't know what you've got in there with you. Walk away from it, and I'll tell Darren you cooperated. That matters for your petition." Petition. The formal dissolution of a rejection bond, the only legal way to remove a suppressor brand without a new mate claim. It took months and required the original rejecting alpha's signature, Darren's signature. She breathed carefully through her nose. "I'm not walking away," she said, "and I'm not opening this door. And if you break it down in Millhaven Market District at dawn, the magistrate will have questions about why 5 Duskfall wolves are forcing entry into a private dwelling over what the market record shows as a legally purchased animal." Silence. Longer this time. Then boots on the path, moving away. All 5 sets. Noreen stayed exactly where she was until she couldn't hear them anymore. She turned around. Cale was watching her with that expression she was beginning to recognize. The one that wasn't quite readable, but had something underneath it working very hard. He'd been listening to every word. She could tell from the way his attention had tracked the voices outside, parsing, Cataloging. They're going to come back with documentation, she said, or go to the magistrate themselves and file a counterclaim on the sale. I bought you legally, but I can't prove what they were doing to you, and without that— She stopped, pressed her fingers to her eyes for a moment. I need to think. Cale made a sound, low, effortful. He was pushing against the suppressor mark's constraint on his speech. She could see it in the tension of his jaw. A single word came out, shaped carefully around whatever was blocking it. Leave. She looked at him. He held her gaze and said it again. Leave. You. You want me to leave? She asked. He shook his head, a hard, short movement. Tried again. You leave. Safe. You want me to leave so I'm safe. He dipped his head once. And what happens to you? No answer. Which was an answer. No, she said simply. He made a sound of frustration, fully animal, a low, warning rumble, and she held up one hand, not backing away from it. I heard you, she said. The answer is still no, so we need a different plan. The plan came from an unexpected direction. Josie Friedman arrived at the shed door just after sunrise with a covered pot of something that smelled like barley and onion, knocked twice in the pattern she'd established when she'd given Noreen the key, and waited. Noreen opened the door 6 inches. Josie looked at her, looked past her at Cale with the calm of a woman who had run a market stall for 30 years and was not easily startled, looked back at Noreen. Preston McCann was at my stall at first light asking questions about my shed, Josie said conversationally. He was very polite about it. I was also very polite about it. She held out the covered pot. Eat something. Noreen took the pot. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring this to your— Don't apologize to me, Josie said. I gave you the key. That was a choice. She glanced past Noreen again at Cale. That wolf has a suppressor mark on its wrist. Noreen stilled. You can see that from here? I ran a market stall for 30 years, Josie said. I see everything. She folded her hands in front of her. Preston is going to the magistrate this morning. You have until midday before there's a formal order. Maybe less. I know. There's a Wayfarer's Road 3 miles east that bypasses the magistrate's jurisdiction entirely. Once you're past the second millstone marker, Millhaven law can't touch you. Noreen stared at her. Josie's expression did not change. My nephew doesn't actually need the shed back for another month. I may have told you 2 weeks so you'd have a reason to keep moving. I should have been honest. She paused. I'm being honest now. Go east. Today. Before midday. Why are you doing this? Noreen asked quietly. Josie looked at her for a long moment. Because Preston McCann came to my stall at first light, asking questions about a woman who bought a wolf with her last coins to keep it from being destroyed. She picked up her empty pot carrier. Go east, Noreen. She walked back toward the market without looking back. They were packed and moving within the hour. There was not much to pack. Noreen's coat, her herb bundle, the tinderbox, a water skin she'd refilled at the Mill Creek. She kept her hands moving and didn't let herself think too far ahead. Cale walked beside her. Not behind, not ahead. Beside. She noticed it the same way she'd noticed it last night. There was something deliberate about it that she didn't have words for yet. They were a mile east of Millhaven, the cobblestones giving way to packed dirt and the town noise thinning behind them, when a sound cut through the morning air that brought them both to a stop. A horn. Millhaven's magistrate horn, the signal for an official pursuit order. Earlier than midday. Preston had moved faster than she'd expected. Noreen looked at the road ahead, looked at Cale. He was already scanning. Not the road, the tree line north of the path, the ridge beyond it, the low ground to the south. Those layered eyes moving in the deliberate arcs she'd first seen in the market square. Then he stopped scanning. He turned and looked at her directly, and something in his expression had shifted. The calculation was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something that looked almost like a decision being made, a door opening, a thing being considered and accepted. He turned north toward the tree line and looked back at her over his shoulder. Through the trees? She asked. He held her gaze. Off the road, she said. Away from the jurisdiction line. We'd have to camp. She looked at the forest, looked at him. You know where you're going? He turned north again and simply began walking. She followed him. The horn sounded twice more behind them and then faded as the trees closed in, the sound swallowed by old growth and distance, and Noreen kept walking and did not look back at Millhaven and tried very hard not to think about how completely her life had changed in 48 hours. Beside her, Cale's stride was steadier than it had been yesterday. The fresh wound still had her bandaging on it. His suppressor mark was still sealed. But there was a quality to his movement now, a return of something that hadn't been there in the market square. She didn't name it yet, but she noticed it. They camped that night in the shelter of 3 old oaks grown close together, their roots making a natural windbreak. Noreen made a small fire, small enough to be invisible from the road, and heated the remains of Josie's barley pot, and ate half and set the other half near Cale without comment. He ate. She took that as a good sign. The fire burned low. The forest settled around them into its night sounds. Noreen pulled her coat tighter and watched the flames and felt the suppressor brand on her neck ache with the cold, the way it always did. "Cale," she said quietly. He looked at her. "When you said you already knew my name," she chose her words carefully. "You're going to tell me about that eventually. Not tonight, but eventually." He held her gaze across the low fire and said nothing. "And I'm going to need the whole truth," she said. "Not parts of it. All of it." A long pause, then rough and effortful, "Yes." She nodded, fed a small stick to the fire. "All right," she said, "then we sleep." She did not expect to, but the exhaustion of 2 days and 48 hours of being afraid without anyone to be afraid with her finally landed all at once, and she was asleep before the fire had burned down to coals. She did not hear Cale move in the night, but when she woke at gray dawn, he was sitting between her and the direction they'd come from, awake, watching the tree line. She looked at him. He looked back at her. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked. He said nothing. "That's what I thought," she said, and got up to find water. She had no pack, no money, no wolf, and she still didn't open that door. If that kind of quiet courage deserves a witness, subscribe. Don't let her fight in an empty room. Chapter 4. She tries to free him. He refuses to go. 3 days into the forest, and Noreen had established certain facts. Fact 1. Cale was getting stronger. Not quickly, not dramatically, but each morning the quality of his movement was marginally better than the day before, and the fresh wound on his flank was closing cleanly, which she checked every evening with the impersonal efficiency of someone who had learned to separate her healer's hands from everything else she was feeling. Fact 2. He was an extraordinarily poor patient. He did not rest when she told him to rest. He did not stay still when she was treating him. He moved when he decided to move and stopped when he decided to stop, and her instructions were considered and then evaluated on their individual merits, which was infuriating. Fact 3. She was talking to him more than she had talked to anyone in months, and he was responding, not always in words because speech still cost him effort, but in attention. Full, complete, unsettling attention. When she spoke, he listened in a way that made her feel like every word was being recorded somewhere. Fact 4, which she was least comfortable with, she had stopped feeling afraid of him somewhere around the end of the 2nd day, and she was not entirely sure when that had happened or what to do about it. On the morning of the 4th day, she woke before him for the first time. He was on his side near the banked fire, the rise and fall of his breathing slow and deep, genuinely asleep, not the watchful half-rest she'd seen the first nights. She looked at him for a moment. In sleep, his face had lost its constant layer of calculation, and what remained was something that was simply a face. Strong-featured, travel-worn, younger than she'd somehow assumed. She got up quietly and went to check the snare she'd set the night before. She'd caught 2 rabbits. She cleaned them and set them over the rebuilt fire with the last of her dried herbs and water from the nearby stream. And when she turned around, Cale was sitting up watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "Morning," she said. He dipped his head. She crouched by the fire and turned the spit and thought about what she'd been thinking about since before dawn. "I want to talk to you about something," she said. He waited. You're stronger. I can see it. Another week, maybe less, and you'll be able to sustain a full shift whether the suppressor mark allows it or not. Your body is overcoming it. She kept her eyes on the fire. Which means you don't actually need me anymore, in a practical sense. Silence. So I want to say, clearly, so there's no confusion, that you don't owe me anything for the 3 coins or the bandaging or any of it. She finally looked at him. When you're ready to go, you go. I mean that. No debt, no claim. Cale looked at her steadily. Do you understand what I'm saying? She asked. Yes. Good. He said nothing else. She turned back to the fire. Right, well, breakfast first. She woke the next morning to find the shed door, the door of the temporary camp shelter she'd built against a fallen oak, standing wide open. She had opened it. In the night, apparently, she had gotten up, unlatched it, and pushed it fully open, and she had no memory of doing so. She stood in the open doorway in the early gray light and looked at the open space beyond and at Cale, who was sitting 6 feet away watching her with an expression of patient attention. Did I do that? She asked. He said nothing. I did that, she said. Then, because she was already standing here, you can go. Right now if you want. I'm not going to... He sat down. She stared at him. He sat with the unhurried, settled weight of a mountain that had always been a mountain and saw no reason to change that fact. Cale. He looked at her. I'm serious. He continued looking at her. I'm pointing at the forest. She pointed. That is the forest. You could be in it in 30 seconds. Gone. Free. That is what I'm telling you. He looked at the forest, looked back at her, and with an air of someone exercising great patience with a person who was not quite grasping something obvious, he settled his weight more firmly. You are the most aggravating. She stopped, pressed her fingers to her forehead, breathed. Fine, stay. But don't think I'm not serious about the no debt thing, because I am. She turned and went back inside to rebuild the fire and tried to ignore the fact that she was slightly, inexplicably relieved. His speech improved that afternoon. Not suddenly, in increments, the suppressor mark cracking at its edges the way ice cracks in spring, giving way to warmth one fault line at a time. He went from single words to 2-word combinations to, by the time she was checking his wound at dusk, actual sentences. Short, careful, stripped of anything unnecessary, but sentences. The first full one he said to her was, "You should not have bought me." She had heard variations of this before. You keep saying that. It becomes more true each day. He watched her hands working on the bandaging with that characteristic attention. You don't understand what following me means. I'm not following you, she said. I'm walking in the same direction. A pause. That is the same thing. It really isn't. She tied off the fresh dressing. Who suppressed you? Was it your own pack's doing, or... My counsel. She went still. Your counsel. My second. His voice was flat, uninflected. The way she'd learned meant the topic cost him something. He wanted the position I hold. The suppression was to prevent me from being able to fight back. The harvest wounds were to weaken what remained. A pause. He sold me through intermediaries. He did not expect me to survive long enough to reach an auction block. But you did. I did. She sat back and looked at him properly. What position do you hold? He met her gaze and said nothing. She read his face, the deliberate quiet, the way he'd phrased it, the position I hold, not my rank or my role. The distance he put between the words and himself, as though the answer was so large he couldn't hold it casually. She thought about the surgical precision of the harvest wounds, the quality of suppressor mark on his wrist. She'd seen that design in a textbook once, an old one, the kind held only in formal pack libraries. She thought about his eyes, the specific layered quality of them. She thought about a feeling she'd been pushing aside for 4 days. It's a high position, she said carefully. He said nothing. Very high. Still nothing. She let it sit. She would come back to it. Instead, she asked, Your second, does he know you're alive? He will soon. He will have people looking. He paused. Which is why I should not still be here. And yet, he agreed quietly, and there was something in the way he said it that she didn't examine. The message arrived the following morning. Not to her, she had no address, no fixed location. It arrived because a royal messenger on horseback came down the Wayfarers' Road, stopped at every camp and dwelling within sight of it, and nailed a notice to every tree and post within reach. She found one nailed to the oak at the edge of their camp. She read it twice. By order of the Royal Pack Authority, all unregistered wolves within the Eastern Territories are required to present for identification before the authority's enforcer within 48 hours of this notice's posting. Failure to comply carries a sentence of permanent suppression for the wolf and a charge of harboring for their keeper. No exceptions, no extensions. She turned around. Kale had already read it over her shoulder. He was taller. She'd grown accustomed to his presence at her back. It no longer startled her. And his expression had gone very still in the particular way she'd learned meant he was running calculations at speed. 48 hours, she said. Yes. Enforcer. Royal Pack. She looked at the notice again. That's not a local authority. That's direct Crown reach. Yes. They're looking for you specifically, aren't they? Not a question. He was quiet for a moment. They are looking for any wolf that might be me. They don't know where I am. But if an enforcer looks at you, they will know immediately. She folded the notice and put it in her coat pocket and thought about this for the 30 seconds she allowed herself. Then she asked, "Is there anything between permanent suppression and being presented to an enforcer?" Kale looked at her with something careful moving in his eyes. "There is one thing," he said, "a bonded servant declaration. If a wolf is formally registered as bonded to a keeper, the enforcer's authority to seize them is suspended pending the keeper's consent." He paused. "It is a legal status, old law, still binding. How does one file a bonded servant declaration?" "It requires a keeper's verbal claim in front of the enforcer directly. No documentation needed. The keeper assumes full legal responsibility." Another pause, heavier this time. "It would make you a target." "I'm already a target," she said. "Preston McCann has my description filed with the Millhaven magistrate." She met his gaze. "Would it work? Legally, would it actually hold?" "It would hold," he said. "The enforcer would mark you in his record, and you would be bound to present me if commanded by Crown authority within 30 days. He looked at her steadily. "Noreen." "What?" "You understand what I'm asking you to take on." "You're not asking," she said. "I'm deciding." She put the folded notice deeper in her pocket. "We need to find where the enforcer is holding his inspections." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with a careful precision that felt like it was working around something larger, "You are very strange." She looked up at him. "You said that like it's a compliment." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. She wasn't sure she'd seen him smile yet, but the beginning of one, or the memory of one. It appeared and was gone in under a second. "It was," he said, and turned to look at the road. She stood there for a moment with that half-smile's ghost in the air between them, and then she turned and began breaking camp, and neither of them said anything else about it, and it sat in the space between them all morning like a coal that hadn't quite gone out. That night, exhausted and camped a mile from the enforcer's listed inspection post, Noreen fell asleep faster than she intended. She dreamed of a great hall, stone floors, high rafters, and wolves, dozens of them, enormous, silver and black and gray, arranged in a formal circle, heads bowed, every one of them. At the center of the circle, a throne. At the throne, a wolf she recognized. The wolf turned its head and looked directly at her with layered gold-over-silver eyes. She woke up gasping, heart hammering, the pre-dawn dark pressing in around the camp. She turned her head. Kale was awake, watching the tree line. She looked at him, looked away. "No," she told herself firmly. "Anxiety dream, that's all." She lay back down and stared at the canopy above, and very deliberately did not think about thrones. Chapter 5. The night he almost tells her everything. The enforcer's inspection post was a converted way station at the crossroads of the Eastern and Northern Territory roads, a squat stone building with Crown Authority banners hanging limp in the still morning air, and two wolves in formal pack guard livery standing at the entrance with the bored alertness of men who expected no real trouble. Noreen stood at the tree line 100 yards out and studied it. "How many inside?" she asked. "4 more," Cale said beside her. 2 guards, 1 record keeper, the enforcer himself. She glanced at him. "You can tell that from here?" "I can smell that from here." He said it without particular emphasis, a simple statement of capacity. Then, "My range is returning. The suppressor mark is losing hold faster than expected." She filed that away. "All right, we go in calm. You stay 1 step behind me and let me speak first. If he asks you direct questions, answer simply. Name, origin, status, nothing more." She paused. "What name are you using?" A beat. "Cale." "Cale what?" Another beat, slightly longer. "Cale Hardy." She looked at him sidelong. He returned her look with complete composure. "Fine," she said. "Cale Hardy, bonded to Noreen. I'll use my full name for the record. Ready?" He said, "You don't have to do this." "I know," she said, and walked out of the tree line. The enforcer's name, according to the placard on his table, was Philip Bentley. He was a broad man in his 50s, with the build of someone who had once been physically formidable and had settled into a comfortable authority. He had pale eyes that moved with professional efficiency over everyone who came through his door, cataloging and discarding in the same gesture. They moved over Noreen, paused on the suppressor brand at her neck, moved to Cale, stayed there. Noreen spoke before the pause could lengthen into something actionable. "Noreen Wilson, keeper, presenting my bonded servant for registration per the authority's notice." She kept her voice level and her hands still at her sides. "Cale Hardy, unregistered, Eastern Territory, under my bond and care." Philip Bentley looked at Cale for another long moment. Cale stood 1 step behind her left shoulder and said nothing, and looked at approximately the middle distance with the expression of a man who was making a considered effort to appear unremarkable. It was, Noreen thought, almost convincing. "How long has he been bonded to you?" Bentley asked. His voice was unhurried. 11 days, she said. "The bond was established in Millhaven Market. The sale is on record with the market auctioneer." Bentley stood. He was not a short man, but Cale was taller, and when Bentley crossed to stand in front of him, the height difference was noticeable. "Look at me." Cale looked at him. Noreen breathed carefully through her nose and did not move. Bentley studied Cale's face. Cale returned the study with calm, measured patience. The room was very quiet. The record-keeper's quill had stopped moving. "Origin?" Bentley asked. "Northern Territory," Cale said. "Border region." "Pack?" "Disbanded. 3 years ago." Bentley was quiet for another moment. Then he turned and walked back to his table and sat down, and Noreen let out a breath so carefully it made no sound. "I'll register the bond," Bentley said, pulling a ledger toward him. He wrote without looking up. "Keeper's name on record, Wolf's name on record. You are legally bound to present him to Crown Authority within 30 days if summoned." He looked up. "You understand the penalties for harboring an unregistered wolf under false bond?" "I do," she said. "Good." He closed the ledger. His pale eyes went to her neck again, to the suppressor brand, and then to Cale, and something moved briefly in his expression. Not suspicion, something more like arithmetic. "You may go." They went. They were 300 yards from the way station and moving into the tree line before Noreen's hands started shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs and kept walking and told herself it was cold. It was not particularly cold. Cale said nothing for a quarter mile. Then, "You held very well." "Don't compliment me right now," she said. "I'm still calculating how badly that could have gone." "It didn't go badly." "It almost did. He almost knew." She stopped walking and turned to look at him. "He almost knew, Cale. I could see him working it out and then choosing not to, which means either we were lucky or he decided for his own reasons to let it go, and I don't know which one that was, and both of them bother me." He looked at her steadily. It was the second one. She stared at him. You know why he let it go? He recognized me, Cale said simply, and he chose not to act on it. The forest was very quiet around them. He recognized you, she said. Philip Bentley served under my father for 6 years. He retired from Crown service before my second came to power. Cale held her gaze. He is not my enemy. Noreen stood in the middle of the forest path and looked at him and felt the edges of something very large pressing in around the conversation. The thing she hadn't named yet. The thing that had been sitting in her chest since the dream of the throne room. Cale, she said carefully. Yes? Your second, the one who suppressed you and sold you and is looking for you. She kept her voice even. What title does he hold right now, while you're gone? Cale was quiet. What title, she said again, does your second hold? Acting Alpha King, Cale said, until my return or my confirmed death. The words landed in the silence of the forest like stones into still water. Noreen did not say anything for a long moment. Acting Alpha King, she repeated. Yes. Which means you are... Yes. She closed her eyes, opened them. The forest looked exactly the same as it had a minute ago, which seemed unreasonable. You're the Alpha King, she said. Yes. She looked at him. He looked back at her with the expression of a man who has been waiting for a particular conversation to arrive and has made his peace with its arrival and is now simply standing in it. For 11 days, she said, I have been calling you the Beast. A pause. In my head, she clarified. Not aloud, mostly. Something crossed his face, that thing that wasn't quite a smile but was in the same family. Here and gone. I know, he said. She pointed at him. You don't get to look almost amused right now. You lied to me. I did not lie. I withheld. That is the same... It is not the same thing, he said, and she heard her own words from 4 days ago return to her with perfect calm and felt a flash of irritation so sharp it almost made her laugh. She did not laugh. She turned and started walking because standing still while this settled felt impossible. He fell into step beside her. She didn't speak to him for 2 hours. Not as punishment. She wasn't built for punishing silences. They cost too much. But because she genuinely needed the time to reorganize everything she understood about the last 11 days against what she now knew. The way he'd scanned the market square, the suppressor mark's design from a formal pack library text, the surgical precision of the harvest wounds. They hadn't been harvesting alpha essence. They'd been harvesting royal essence, the most potent and valuable substance in the known pack world. Philip Bentley's careful, chosen silence, the way Cale moved, the quality of his stillness, the manner of his attention. She had been a healer for 6 years. She had read people for a living. She had missed it completely. Again, that thought arrived with an unpleasant familiarity. I should have seen it, she said, not really to him. No one was meant to see it, he said. That was the point. I'm a healer. I read, you read illness and injury. You read pain. He paused. You were not looking for a king in a market auction because there was no reason to look for one. That is not a failure of observation. That is a reasonable assumption about the world. She glanced at him. You could not have known, he said simply, and I could not tell you. Anyone sheltering me becomes a target for my second's people. The less you knew, the more expendable I was if they found us, she said. A pause. The safer you were. That is a very royal way to describe leaving someone uninformed in a dangerous situation. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said, it is. I am aware that it is. Another pause. I am sorry for it. She looked at him sharply because she hadn't expected that. Not the deflection of a man used to authority, but a plain apology, undecorated. He met her look with no particular defense. She breathed out through her nose and walked on, and decided she would accept the apology later, when she'd finished being irritated. They camped early that evening. She was tired in a way that went deeper than her legs, the bone-deep exhaustion of sustained tension releasing all at once. She built the fire and he sat across from it, and she found herself studying his face in the firelight with a directness she'd been mostly avoiding. He was watching her do it without comment. "How long?" she asked. He understood the question. The coup was 11 days before the market. I was suppressed in my own council chamber by people I had trusted for years. Something moved across his face and was controlled. I woke in a harvest facility 2 days later. And they were already... the wounds. "The second session," he said. They moved quickly. She was quiet for a moment. "You were afraid?" Not a question. A healer's reading. He looked at the fire. "I was," he said. "At first." A pause. "Then I was angry. Anger is more useful." She almost smiled. "I know something about that." He looked back at her, and something in the firelight caught his eyes at an angle that made the gold over silver visible even now, even in his human form. She'd grown used to his eyes over 11 days, but the specific quality of them still caught her off guard sometimes, the sense of depth, of something very old looking out. She looked away first, which she told herself was simply because the fire needed tending. She was almost asleep, coat pulled up, the fire a low, steady warmth, when she heard him speak. Quiet, directed at the fire rather than at her, the way people spoke when they weren't sure if they were speaking aloud on purpose. "You asked me several days ago why I stayed when you told me to go." She kept her eyes closed, kept her breathing even. "I told myself it was practical," he said, "that I was too weak to survive alone, that the suppressor mark needed time, that your cover was useful." A long pause. "Those things were true." The fire crackled. "They were not the only true things," he said. Silence. She kept her eyes closed and her breathing even and said nothing, because something told her that if she responded he would stop, and she was not ready for him to stop. But he said nothing more. After a while, she genuinely slept. In her dream, she was in the throne room again, the wolves in their circle, the throne at the center. But this time, she was not outside the circle looking in. She was inside it, and the throne was empty, and every wolf in the circle was looking at her. She woke before dawn with her heart loud in her chest, and Frost on the ground, and Kale sitting between her and the road, awake, watching. "The dream again?" he asked without turning. She stared at the back of his head. "How did you—" "Your breathing changes," he said simply, "when the dream comes." She sat up slowly. "What do you dream about?" she asked. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "The same place," he said finally. "Different perspective." She looked at him. He did not turn around. She opened her mouth to ask what that meant, and then her eye caught something at the far edge of the camp, a notice nailed to a tree she hadn't camped near last night, meaning someone had been close enough in the dark to nail it without waking either of them. She crossed to it, read it. Her stomach dropped. It was not an authority notice. It was a bounty notice, hand-lettered, not official, the kind distributed through black market channels. At the top, a face sketched in ink, Kale's face, and below it, in plain language, "Alive only. Substantial reward. Inquire at Duskfall Pack Authority Eastern Reach Office." Her former pack. Her former mate's pack. Darren's people were working with Kale's traitorous second. She turned around. Kale had already read it over her shoulder. His face was perfectly still. "They know we're in this region," she said. "Yes." "They were close enough last night to nail that to a tree." "Yes." She looked at him. "How long have we got?" "Hours," he said. "Maybe less." She folded the notice, put it in her pocket next to the authority one, and started breaking camp. Her hands, she noted with something like satisfaction, were not shaking this time. Chapter 6. The twist. She finds out. Not from him. They moved fast and said little. Noreen broke camp in under 10 minutes. There was not much to break. She had learned to travel light in ways she hadn't known she'd needed before, and they were moving northeast through the old growth before the frost had fully lifted from the ground. Kale set the pace. She matched it. Neither of them spoke about the bounty notice because there was nothing useful to say about it yet, and they both understood that. What she was thinking about, behind the route planning and the listening for pursuit and the calculation of distances, was Darren. 6 years. She had known Darren McCoy for 6 years, had healed his pack members, had managed his territory's medical stores, had sat beside him at every formal gathering. She had understood him, she had thought, as well as she understood anyone. And he had rejected her in a public circle, and apparently immediately aligned himself with a political coup against the crown. Not because he believed in the coup. She knew Darren well enough to know he had no ideology beyond his own advancement. He'd aligned with Cale's second because someone had made it worth his while. A pack elevation probably, new territory, something that made publicly humiliating his mate of 6 years look like a reasonable trade. She put the thought away. It was not useful right now. Right now, she told herself, you walk. By mid-morning, they had put 4 miles between themselves and the camp, moving parallel to the Wayfarers Road but staying inside the tree line. Cale was navigating by something she couldn't access. Scent, she assumed, or some deeper territorial instinct, leading them around low ground and toward higher, drier terrain where tracks would be harder to follow. She was watching his back and thinking about pace when he stopped. Sudden and complete, the way he stopped when his senses caught something hers couldn't. What? She asked quietly. Town, he said, 1/2 mile, east. She hadn't known there was a town this far off the Wayfarers Road. How large? Small, market town. He was quiet for a moment, reading something on the air. Weekly market, today. She thought about this. Supplies, she said. We need them. We're down to nothing. It's a risk. Everything is a risk. She came to stand beside him and looked through the trees toward the east, where she could now, faintly, hear the distant sound of commerce. I'll go alone. You stay in the tree line. He turned to look at her. She read the objection in his face before it reached his mouth. You have a bounty notice with your face on it circulating through Duskfall channels, she said. I have a suppressor brand and no money, and the general appearance of a woman who has been sleeping in forests, which is unremarkable in a market town. She met his gaze. I'll be 20 minutes. He was quiet for a moment. 30, he said. If you're not back in 30 minutes, then come find me, I know. She turned east. Don't move from this spot. The town was called Ashford's Cross, according to the carved sign at its edge, and its market was exactly as advertised. Small, weekly, the kind of market where everyone knew everyone, and a stranger's face was noticed but not immediately suspicious. Noreen moved through it efficiently. A woman named Betsy Taylor ran the dried provisions stall and sold her a week's worth of travel food, hard cheese, dried meat, oat cakes, for the 3 copper coins she'd found in her coat lining the day before, and a trade of her grandmother's ring, which she made without letting herself think about it. She was turning to leave when she saw the board. Every market town had a posting board. Announcements, lost livestock, debt notices. She walked past them without looking as a rule, had been walking past them without looking for 11 days. Something made her stop. She turned back. There were 3 notices on the board: a lost mule, a debt summons, and a third notice, larger than the others, printed rather than hand-lettered, bearing the Crown Authority seal at its top. She read it. She read it again. The market noise continued around her. Voices, cartwheels, someone haggling over the price of salt, and Noreen Wilson stood very still in the middle of it and read the notice for the 3rd time because she needed to be certain she was reading it correctly. By Crown Authority, missing. Cale Renard, Alpha King of the Western and Eastern Pack Territories, missing from the royal seat 11 days. Any information regarding his whereabouts to be reported immediately to the nearest Crown Authority post. Reward, 500 gold sovereign. Below the text, a portrait sketch. Formal, precise, done from official records. His face. Unmistakably, completely, with no possible alternate interpretation, his face. Alpha King. Not a high-ranking wolf, not a council member, not a regional pack leader. Alpha King. 500 gold sovereign was more money than Noreen could conceptualize in a single number. It was the kind of reward that ended wars. She stood at the posting board and breathed, and looked at the sketch of the face she had been looking at across a campfire for 11 nights, and felt the last 11 days rearrange themselves around this fact like furniture moved in a room she thought she'd known. The market square in Millhaven, Cale in chains, scanning for exits with cold, professional precision. Not a wolf in panic, a king in captivity, assessing his options. Knowing her name before she'd told him. Of course he had known her name. She had been a registered healer in a pack territory under Crown jurisdiction. He had access to every pack's records. Choosing not to shift back to human form even when he was strong enough to, because a large injured wolf attracted less scrutiny than a large injured man with a face on a Crown authority notice. Staying when she'd told him to go. Not because he had nowhere to go, because moving through open territory alone with a bounty on his head was more dangerous than staying with cover. Or, the thought arrived quietly, and she did not examine it, because he had chosen to stay. She folded the notice with hands that were completely steady and put it in her coat pocket with the other 2 notices and stood for a moment in the market square with her eyes closed. Then she walked back to the forest. He was exactly where she'd left him. He was watching her face as she came through the trees. She knew he could read something in it. Scent, tension, the specific quality of her silence, because she saw the moment his expression changed. The calculation sharpening. The preparation. She stopped in front of him. She reached into her coat pocket. She held up the Crown authority notice with his face on it. He looked at it. Looked at her. She waited. His expression did not become defensive or apologetic or explanatory. He simply looked at her with the steady, even attention she had come to associate with him at his most honest, and waited in return. She lowered the notice. "The Alpha King," she said. "Yes. Not a council member, not a regional leader. The Alpha King." "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. "You let me call you the Beast for 11 days. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not the moment for it, and he appeared to know it, because it was controlled almost instantly. "How long," she said very evenly, "were you going to wait before telling me?" "Until you were safely out of my second's reach," he said. "The less you knew, the more expendable I was," she said. "We've had this conversation." "The safer, don't." She held up one hand. "Don't give me the royal version, give me the honest one." Silence. He looked at the hand she'd raised and then at her face, and something in his expression shifted beneath its surface, the way deep water moved under ice. "I did not know how to tell you," he said finally. "That is the honest version." She blinked. "I have been who I am for my entire life," he said. "I have never been in a situation in which I needed to explain it to someone who already knew me as something else. And you already knew me." He paused. "As the Beast, apparently." She stared at him. "In your head," he added. "Mostly." She made a sound. It was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, and somewhere in the middle. She pressed her fingers over her mouth. He watched her with careful attention. She breathed, removed her fingers, looked at him. "You knew my name before I told you?" "Yes." "You have my pack records?" "Every registered healer in Crown territory, yes." "You stayed when I told you to go?" A pause. "Yes." "Was that tactical? Was that because moving alone was more dangerous?" A longer pause. "It was," he said, "among other things." Among other things. She held his gaze, and he held hers, and the forest was very quiet, and neither of them elaborated on what the other things were. She looked down at the notice in her hand. Then she did something that surprised even herself. She was angry. Not afraid, not overwhelmed, not reverent. Angry. "You let me stand in front of Philip Bentley and lie to an enforcer for you," she said. "You let me use my last coins to buy you at auction. You let me argue with Duskfall wolves through a closed door while you sat next to me and said nothing about what you were." Her voice was completely level. "And you are going to tell me all of it now, not parts. All of it. Right now. Starting with your second's name." He looked at her. "His name," she said, and how many men he has, and what his plan is, and what your plan is, and why my former pack is involved, and every single other thing you have been carrying that you decided I didn't need to know." She held his gaze without blinking. "I spent my last 3 coins on you. I have earned the truth." The forest held its breath. Then Kale said, "His name is Roger Hardy." And he told her everything. It took an hour. She sat across from him on a fallen log and listened without interrupting, which cost her something, but she managed it. She listened to the structure of the coup. Hardy had spent 2 years building alliances among the lesser pack councils, promising elevated status and territorial concessions in exchange for silence and cooperation when the time came. Darren McCoy's Duskfall pack was one of 14 who had agreed to look the other way. She listened to the harvest operation. Hardy had needed Kale's royal essence not just to weaken him, but to produce a substance that could be used to forge crown authority seals. With enough of it, Hardy could issue orders that appeared to come from the king's own mark. He had been building a stockpile. She listened to the timeline. Hardy had given himself 30 days to confirm Kale's death before formally declaring a succession crisis and positioning himself as interim king. 11 days were already gone. 19 days left. When he was finished, she sat quietly for a moment. "Your loyal generals," she said. "The ones who don't know where you are." 3, he said. "Wilson Reed in the Northern Territory, Armando Jimenez at the Eastern Coast Garrison, and Bernard Allen, who was out of the capital when the coup happened and has been unreachable since." "Do they know you're alive?" "No." "Can we reach them in 19 days?" He was quiet for a moment. "Wilson Reed is 8 days' travel north. That is our best option." She nodded, stood up. "Then we go north." He looked up at her. "Noreen." She looked at him. "I am sorry," he said, "genuinely, for all of it." A pause. "You deserved the truth from the beginning." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're going to make it up to me," she said, "by getting me to Wilson Reed alive and then reclaiming your throne and dissolving the Duskfall Pack's political standing so that Darren McCoy has to petition the Alpha Council for basic territorial rights for the next decade." She picked up her pack. "That will be a good start." Something crossed Kale's face, fully this time, not the corner of the mouth almost, but an actual, complete expression of something warm and startled and genuine. She turned north before she could look at it too long. "Come on," she said, 19 days. He stood and fell into step beside her, and for the first time in 11 days, the silence between them felt like something chosen rather than maintained. She spent everything she had on a stranger and asked for nothing back except honesty. The least you can do is hit like, you've already given her less than she gave him. Chapter 7. She becomes the shield. He becomes the threat. They moved north. The first 2 days were hard traveling. No road, dense old growth, terrain that climbed steadily and gave nothing back on the descent. Noreen's boots were not made for this, and her feet knew it by the end of the first day, but she said nothing about it, because saying nothing about it was the kind of decision that cost less than the alternative. Kale noticed anyway. On the morning of the second day, she found strips of soft bark layered inside her boots while she'd been washing at the stream. Bark that had been prepared, softened, shaped while she slept. She put the boots on without comment and pretended not to notice the way he was watching to see if she'd noticed, and they walked on, and neither of them said anything, and it was somehow better that way. His strength was returning in visible increments now. The suppressor mark on his wrist had faded from a clean burn scar to something almost indistinct, the seal losing integrity the way all forced suppressions eventually did when the wolf inside was strong enough and given enough time. She watched it during wound checks, a habit she'd maintained even as the wounds themselves healed, and she could see the mark retreating like a tide going out. On the third morning north, she reached for his wrist to check it, and his hand closed gently around her fingers before she could pull back. She looked up. He was looking at her hand in his, and then at her face, with an expression she had no clean category for. "It's almost gone," she said, keeping her voice practical. "Yes." He did not release her hand immediately. Then he did. 2 more days, perhaps. "Good," she said. That's good. She went back to breaking camp and told herself her pulse had elevated because of the cold. On the fourth day north, they came down out of the old growth onto a drove road, an old livestock route, wide enough for 2 carts and patched with centuries of use, and Noreen felt the specific relief of a surface that did not fight her feet. Half a mile along the drove road, they found the way station. It was a standard Crown way station, a stone building about the size of Josie's shed, maintained for Crown messengers and official travelers, stocked with basic supplies and a fire grate, theoretically open to any traveler. In practice, visited primarily by people who had official business being on the road. The door was standing open. Noreen slowed. Cale was already still beside her. "Someone's inside," he said quietly. "Recent?" "Hour ago, maybe less." He was reading the air with that focused attention. "One person, female. She's still there." They exchanged a look. "We need the supplies," Noreen said. "Yes. And a fire would be... it would be good." "Yes." "So we go in?" "Yes," he said. "But I go first." She let him, partly because arguing about it felt like a waste of energy, and partly because the truth was that Cale at partial strength was still considerably more capable of handling a threat than she was, and acknowledging true things was not weakness. The woman inside was sitting on the floor beside a cold fire grate, with her back against the wall and her knees drawn up, and she looked up when they entered with the expression of someone who had moved past startled and landed in exhausted. She was older than Noreen by perhaps a decade, weathered and sharp-featured, with the particular stillness of someone trained to assess threat quickly. She looked at Cale, looked at Noreen, looked at Cale again. Then she said, in a voice that was very controlled, "My king." The words landed in the small stone room like something dropped from a height. Noreen looked at Cale. Cale was looking at the woman with an expression that had gone through several rapid stages and settled on something between relief and caution. "Gale," he said. The woman, Gale Blackwell, apparently, pressed her fist to her chest in a formal gesture and then dropped it. "You're alive," she said. "Bernard Allen has been..." She stopped, reorganized. "Allen sent me. He's been tracking Hardy's movements for 9 days. He didn't know where you were, only that you weren't dead." Her eyes moved to the faded mark on his wrist. "Suppressed." "Was," Cale said, "almost fully broken now." Gale nodded. Her eyes went to Noreen with the direct, cataloging attention of someone who gathered information professionally. "And this is?" "Noreen Wilson," Noreen said, before Cale could frame the introduction in whatever formal or strategic terms he was preparing. "I bought him at a market auction 17 days ago. He was 2 days from dying." A pause. Gale looked at Cale. "That is accurate," he said. Another pause. Something shifted in Gale's expression, not softening exactly, more like a recalculation completing. "I see," she said, in a tone that suggested she saw considerably more than the words indicated. She looked back at Noreen. "Then you have my gratitude, and my king's, I expect, though he'll be formal about it." "He is very formal about things," Noreen agreed. Cale said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Gale Blackwell was, it emerged over the next hour, one of Bernard Allen's senior scouts. Not a fighter, but an information gatherer, which in Gale's case appeared to mean she knew approximately everything. She laid it out with efficient precision, while Noreen built the fire and Cale sat across from Gale with his full attention locked on her words. Hardy had moved faster than expected. He had already dispatched a formal announcement to the Outer Pact territories, stating that the king had suffered a sudden illness and was in seclusion, a story that would hold for perhaps another 10 days before the lesser councils began demanding proof of life. He had installed 2 of his allied pack leaders on the Royal Council in interim positions. He had, critically, been unable to produce a confirmed death, which was the one thing preventing him from moving to formal succession. "Wilson Reed," Cale said. "What's his position?" "Secure," Gale said. "Reed doesn't believe the illness story. He's been quietly pulling his forces south toward the capital for 6 days. He's waiting for confirmation that you're alive before he moves openly." She paused. "If you can reach him, or get word to him, he'll move within 48 hours. How far is Reed's current position from here?" 4 days hard travel, 2.5 if you shift." Kale and Noreen looked at each other. "Your mark," she said. 2 more days, he said. "Perhaps 1. Then 4 days walking until you can shift, and then you can close the distance faster." She thought about it. "That still works. That's within the 19 days. Gale was watching this exchange with the focused attention of someone filing every detail. 19 days from when?" she asked. "From when Hardy gave himself 30 days to confirm the king's death," Noreen said. "We're at 17 days gone. 13 left." Gale looked at Kale. "She's running your timeline." "She runs most things," Kale said with a flatness that was not quite flat enough to be truly flat. Noreen decided not to examine that sentence. Gale left at dusk. She had information to carry back to Alan, a route to maintain, a network of contacts that needed to know the king was alive and moving. She pressed a leather pouch into Noreen's hands before she went. Dried provisions, 2 gold coins, a small glass vial. "What's this?" Noreen asked, holding up the vial. "Suppressant neutralizer," Gale said, "for his wrist. It'll take the last of the mark off tonight instead of 2 days from now." Her eyes went briefly to the brand on Noreen's neck. "I have one for that as well if you want it." Noreen's hand went instinctively to her neck. "That's not—" She stopped. "That mark requires a formal dissolution or a new mate claim. It requires a formal pack authority with jurisdiction over the original sealing," Gale said. "The Alpha King has that jurisdiction over every pack in every territory." She paused deliberately. "If he chose to dissolve it." A silence. Noreen was aware, without looking at him, that Kale was very still. "That's not—" She stopped again, chose her words carefully. "That's not necessary right now." "No," Gale agreed, in a tone that reserved judgment on the word now. She handed Noreen the vial. "For his wrist, then, tonight." She looked at Kale one more time. 4 days to read. Stay off the Drove Road after tomorrow morning. Hardy's people are moving south along it." Then she slipped out the door into the evening and was gone. The fire was good. The provisions were better. Noreen ate more than she had in days and felt something in her body gradually unknot. Kale sat across the fire with the vial Gale had left, turning it in his fingers. "Give it here," Noreen said. He passed it across. She unstoppered it, moved to sit beside him, and took his wrist. The neutralizer smelled like pine resin and something metallic, and it went onto the suppressor mark with a small cloth she tore from the hem of her undershirt. The mark dissolved. Not dramatically, it simply faded, the burnt edges softening and then disappearing, leaving skin that was slightly paler beneath where it had been. She pressed her thumb gently to the spot where it had been, smooth, unmarked. She became aware that he was watching her face. She looked up. He was very close. She'd moved to sit beside him for the treatment and hadn't registered how close until this moment. Close enough that the firelight caught the specific layering of his eyes clearly, the gold over silver, and she could see in them, undisguised, something that had been there for days but hadn't been this visible. She was the one who moved back. Practical distance, McMedical distance. "Done," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Noreen." "Don't," she said, not sharply, gently. "You don't know what I was going to say." "I know what you're not going to say," she said. "Not tonight. Not while we're still running and you still have a traitorous second and 13 days to fix your kingdom." She looked at him steadily. "When this is over, all of it, then we talk, but not in the middle of it." He looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. She nodded, moved back to her side of the fire. "Sleep. We move at first light." He didn't argue, but she was aware, settling into her coat with her back to the fire, that the "not tonight" she'd said was different from "no." And from the quality of the silence on his side of the fire, he was aware of it too. They were 2 miles north of the way station on the second morning when the drove road ahead showed fresh tracks, wolf tracks, multiple, heading south, recently made. Cale stopped. "Hardy's people," he said. "Gale said tomorrow morning," Noreen said. They moved faster. He was reading the tracks with a focus she recognized. 6 wolves, shifted, moving at patrol pace. He looked up. "They're coming back north. We have perhaps 20 minutes before they reach this point." "Off the road," she said immediately. "Into the—" "There's no time to get far enough into the tree line," he said. "They'll scent us if we're close." She thought fast. "Then we don't hide. We go forward. We walk toward them on the road, and we're a keeper and her bonded wolf, traveling north on legal business, registered with enforcer Philip Bentley at the Eastern Way Station." She held his gaze. "You're Cale Hardy. You've been my bonded servant for 18 days. We have documentation." He looked at her. "I know," she said. "It's the same bluff." "These are not Philip Bentley," he said. "They are Hardy's wolves. They will not choose to let it go." "Then we handle that when it happens." She straightened her coat. "You walk behind my left shoulder. You answer only what I ask you to answer, and whatever they say to me, you hold." She met his eyes directly. "Can you hold?" He held her gaze, and she watched something move through it. Not offense at the question, but the specific consideration of a man who understood exactly what she was asking and was answering it honestly. "I can hold," he said. She turned and walked toward the sound of approaching wolves. There were 6 of them, as Cale had said, shifted back to human form now that they were on a traveled road, wearing traveling clothes over the specific physical bearing of trained pack fighters. Their leader was a broad man with a scar across his jaw who looked at Noreen with the practiced suspicion of someone paid to be suspicious. "Roads restricted north of this point," he said. "Crown Authority order. Where are you headed?" "North Way Station," Noreen said. "I have a healer's appointment with the garrison at Harrow's Field. Standing arrangement." She said it with the flat certainty of someone reciting a fact rather than constructing a story. "We're registered with enforcer Bentley at the Eastern Post. My bonded servant," she gestured behind her without looking, "Cale Hardy, Eastern Territory, bond established 18 days ago at Millhaven Market." The scarred man looked past her at Cale. Cale stood 1 step behind her left shoulder and looked at the middle distance with the complete absence of expression she'd come to recognize as his version of invisibility. Not submission, not threat, simply absence, as though the most interesting thing in the vicinity was somewhere else entirely. The scarred man studied him for a long time. Noreen did not fill the silence. Filling silence was confession. "Healer," the scarred man said finally. "What kind of healing?" "Herbs and poultice work, wound management, some fever treatment." She held his gaze. "I'm not a battle healer if that's what you're asking. I have no military application." He looked at her neck, at the suppressor brand. She let him look. "Rejected Omega healer," he said, to no one in particular. His tone was not cruel, simply categorizing, placing her in a box he understood. "Yes," she said. He looked at Cale one more time. The scarred jaw worked slightly. She could see him weighing, the effort of investigating further against the low-value presentation of what he was looking at. A rejected Omega and her bonded wolf. Unremarkable. Below his mandate. "Move through quickly," he said. "Don't stop before the way station." She nodded once and walked forward, and he stepped aside, and she walked past him with Cale 1 step behind her, and did not change her pace or her breathing for 200 yards. Then Cale said, very quietly behind her, "Don't stop walking." "I wasn't going to," she said, equally quiet. "Third man from the left was looking at me too long." "I saw him." "He's going to report it." "I know. How long do we have?" "If he sends a runner, 4 hours before Hardy's people redirect toward us. If he sends a shifted wolf, 2. "Then we're not going to the Northern Way Station," she said. "We cut east, off all roads, and we move for Reed directly." "That's rough terrain." "Yes," she said, "it is." He was quiet. "Cale." "Yes." "You held." A pause. "I told you I would." She didn't look back at him, but something in her chest settled, quiet and certain, into a place it had been looking for. She turned east off the Drove Road into the rough terrain, and he followed, and behind them the Drove Road lay empty in the morning light, and they did not look back. Chapter 8. The Betrayal That Was Always Coming. The terrain east of the Drove Road was exactly as difficult as advertised. No paths, ground that rose and fell without pattern, broken by rocky outcrops and sudden drops, and streams that had no bridges because no one had ever needed bridges here. Noreen's repaired boots held through the first day and began to protest on the second, and she stopped once at midday to retie them with a strip of bark, and said nothing about it. Cale said nothing either. He simply moderated his pace without appearing to, so that she was never quite at her limit. She noticed. She didn't comment. It had become a kind of language between them, the things they did for each other that neither acknowledged aloud, a grammar of small actions that had built up over 20 days into something she had stopped trying to categorize. His suppressor mark was gone entirely now. She could see the change in him, subtle but real, like a window being opened. The quality of his stillness had shifted from compression to readiness, like something coiled rather than something contained. His senses were operating at full range, she could tell from the way his attention moved, and twice in 2 days he redirected their path without explanation, and twice they later heard or smelled what he'd been avoiding. She had stopped asking him to explain these redirections. She simply followed them and trusted the reasoning would be evident eventually, which it always was. On the third night east, she woke to find him crouched at the edge of their camp, with his head tilted slightly, reading the dark. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "Someone is following us," he said. "Has been since yesterday morning." She sat up fully. "Hardy's people?" "No." His voice was strange, flat in a specific way. "The scent is familiar." "Familiar how?" He was quiet for a moment. "Duskfall Pack." The name landed like a stone. She breathed through it. "How many?" "One, moving alone." He paused. "I recognize the individual scent. It's been coming up in my tracking since Millhaven." She looked at his profile in the dark. "You recognized it in Millhaven?" "Yes." "And you didn't tell me?" "I wasn't certain, and then I was, and He stopped. "I didn't want to tell you." She understood then, before he said the name. "Darren," she said. "Yes." She didn't sleep again that night. She lay on her back and looked at the canopy and thought about Darren McCoy, with the particular clarity that came from not trying to feel anything about him, just examining the facts the way she'd examine a wound, looking for the actual shape of the damage. He had followed them. Not Hardy's wolves, not a pack hunting party, him. Personally, alone, for at least 2 days. Darren was not a tracker by training. He was a political animal, a man who worked through influence and alliance and the careful management of who owed him what. He didn't pursue things personally unless the stakes were very specific, which meant this was personal. She thought about the bounty notice, Duskfall Pack Authority, Eastern Reach Office. Hardy had made Darren's pack a formal partner in the coup. Darren had accepted, which meant he now had a vested interest in Hardy's success, which meant he had a vested interest in Cale not reaching Wilson Reed. But he was following them alone, which meant either he hadn't told Hardy's people where they were, which would be strange if he was Hardy's partner, or he wanted to handle this himself before involving Hardy. Why would he want to handle this himself? She turned that question over until dawn. Cale woke her at first light with a hand on her shoulder, which was new. He had always made noise when he needed to wake her, some sound that gave her the choice of surfacing at her own pace. The hand was direct and warm, and she sat up immediately. "He's close," Cale said. She rose and packed in silence, and they moved east without making a fire. By mid-morning, she could feel it too. Not the scent or the tracking, nothing that sophisticated, but the particular prickling awareness of being watched that she'd developed over 3 weeks of being hunted. It sat between her shoulder blades. They stopped at noon to water at a stream, and she turned around. Darren was standing 30 feet behind them at the tree line. He looked smaller than she remembered, That was the first thing she noticed, and it startled her. She had been afraid of this man, had built him in the 2 weeks since the rejection into something that occupied more space than one person should, and standing here in a forest clearing, he was simply a man of medium height and medium build who looked tired and cold and had been following her through rough terrain for 2 days. He was looking at Kale, not at her, at Kale. "I know who you are," he said. His voice was steady. "I've known since the 3rd day. Gail Blackwell was seen leaving that way station, and her face is in Hardy's files." His eyes moved briefly to Noreen. "He has the Alpha King. She has the Alpha King." He said it like he was still working out what to do with the information. "Darren," Noreen said. His eyes moved to her. "I'm not here for what you think." "Then tell me what you're here for," she said. "Because from where I'm standing, you look like a man who made a deal with a traitor and is now following the person he publicly destroyed to deliver her to that traitor's people." Something moved across his face. "Hardy's people don't know where you are," he said. "I didn't tell them." "Why not?" Kale asked. His voice was quiet and very even. Darren looked at him with the expression of a man addressing something much larger than he'd prepared for. "Because I made a mistake," he said. "Several of them." His eyes went back to Noreen. "Hardy promised pack elevation, new territory. I believed him." A pause. "I also believed that rejecting you that it was straightforward, that you'd petition, find a new bond, move on." He stopped. "I didn't think it would cost me everything," Noreen said. "My home, my work, my standing, my wolf. You didn't think publicly rejecting your mate in a gathering circle would cost her everything?" He had the decency to look directly at what she was saying rather than away from it. "No," he said. "I didn't think it through. That doesn't fix it." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." A silence. "Hardy is going to send people to this region within the day," Darren said. He suspected Blackwell had made contact when she disappeared, and he's moving a party north to intercept. He paused. 8 wolves, shifted, with silver-laced weapons. Kale went very still. "How do you know this?" Noreen asked. "Because he told me yesterday when he summoned me to report your position," Darren said. "He was angry I hadn't located you faster. He gave me until midday today before he moves the party regardless." He looked at Noreen steadily. "I came to warn you instead." The forest was quiet. "Why?" Kale asked. Darren looked at him. "Because what Hardy is doing is wrong, and I knew it when I agreed to it, and I agreed anyway." A pause. "And because she—" He stopped, started again. "Because she doesn't deserve to die for my decisions." Noreen looked at him for a long moment. "How far are Hardy's party from this position?" Kale asked. "Half a day south if they move at pace," Darren said. "Less if they shift." "And Reed?" Darren frowned. "Wilson Reed? He's—" Something changed in his expression, a rapid reassessment. "You're going to Reed?" "How far?" Kale asked again. 2 days north of here," Darren said slowly, "but Hardy has people on the Drove Road." "We're not on the Drove Road," Noreen said. "We've been cutting east." Darren looked at her, and then at the terrain around them and worked something out. "There's a pass," he said, "through the Harrow Ridge. I know it. I hunted through there years ago. It cuts the 2 days to 1, and it's not on any official route." He paused. "Hardy's people won't know it." Another silence. "You'd take us there," Kale said, not a question. "Yes." "And we're meant to trust that?" Noreen said. Darren looked at her. "No," he said. "You're not meant to trust it. You should verify everything I've told you and make your own decision. That's—" He stopped. "That's what you always did. I never trusted it when you did it, and I should have." He met her eyes. "I know what I did to you was wrong, Noreen. I'm not asking you to forgive it. I'm asking you to let me do one thing right." The wind moved through the trees above them. Noreen looked at Kale. He was watching her, not making the decision, not weighing in, giving her the call. She turned back to Darren. "You walk ahead of us," she said. "You don't shift. If at any point your route leads us toward Hardy's people rather than away from them, Kale will know before you do." She held his gaze. "Understood?" "Yes," he said. Then show us the pass. Darren walked ahead. The pass through the Harrow Ridge was real, a narrow cut between two rock faces that the official maps had apparently never recorded, wide enough for single file and navigable if you knew where to look for the footing. It saved them, by Noreen's estimate, the better part of a day. They were through the pass and into the gentler terrain beyond by late afternoon, and Darren had not led them wrong. She was recalibrating, not forgiving, not trusting, but recalibrating, because she was a healer, and healers dealt in what was actually true rather than what was convenient. When Cale went rigid, she stopped. "What?" she said. "They're here," he said. "Ahead of us, not behind." "Hardy's people?" "Yes." He was reading the air with focused intensity. "They flanked. They didn't come south, they circled. Someone told them about the pass." She looked at Darren. Darren had gone pale. "I didn't—" He stopped, turned, sniffed the air with the automatic instinct of a wolf, and his face changed. "That's Boyd Lacey," he said. "He's Hardy's tracker. He's been in my pack for 2 years. I didn't know he was reporting to Hardy directly." "Someone in your pack informed on the pass," Cale said. "Not me," Darren said. "I swear to you, not me." Cale looked at him for a long moment. She watched him read Darren the way he read everything, methodically, without rushing to the conclusion he might prefer, and then something in his expression settled. "I believe you," he said. Darren blinked. "It doesn't change the situation," Cale said. "They're ahead. Hardy's party will be coming up behind us. We're in the pass." He said it simply, without drama, the way he said all the true things. They were trapped. Noreen looked up at the rock faces on either side, looked at the narrow track ahead, looked at Cale. His suppressor mark was gone, his strength was back. He had not shifted since she'd bought him in the market. He had been in human form for 22 days, first because he couldn't shift, and then because shifting would be visible and identifiable. She looked at him. He looked at her. "How many can you handle?" she asked. "Ahead? 2, maybe 3. He paused. "Behind will be 8. That's too many alone." "Not alone," Darren said. They both looked at him. He looked back steadily. "I'm a Duskfall Alpha," he said. "I can fight." A pause. "I should fight. For this." Noreen looked at Cale. Cale looked at Darren with that careful, measuring assessment. "Take the rear with me," Cale said. "Noreen goes ahead," she said, because she had already worked this out. "Clears through to the open ground on the other side, finds high ground, watches for Reed's scouts." She met Cale's eyes. "Reed's people will be ranging this far south if he's been pulling forces north for days. If I can reach one of his scouts—" "It's exposed ground," Cale said. "I know." "Noreen." "The suppressor mark on my neck," she said. "It's been burning for 3 days, Cale. Differently than before. Something is happening under it." She held his gaze. "If I need to, I think I can. I don't know what I can do, but I think I'm not as exposed as I look." He looked at the brand on her neck. His expression moved through several things quickly. "What do you feel?" he asked, carefully. "Like something that's been locked in a very small space for a very long time," she said, "is running out of patience." The sound of shifted wolves came from behind them, filtering through the pass. "Go," Cale said. "Fast, don't stop." She went. The open ground beyond the pass was exactly what Darren had promised. A broad, sloping meadow, the Harrow Valley falling away below it, the Northern Territories rising in the distance. She ran across it without looking back, listening to the sounds beginning in the pass behind her. Snarls, impact, the specific violence of wolves in combat. She was 200 yards out when the suppressor brand on her neck cracked. Not metaphorically. She felt it. A physical fracture, like ice breaking, running from the edge of the burn scar outward in both directions. Heat flared through her from the neck down. Not painful, not yet, but enormous. Like a door opening onto a room that had always been there. She stumbled, caught herself, kept running. The crack widened. Behind her, she heard a sound that was Kale. She knew his voice, knew it in its human register, and somehow knew this too, the deep, resonant sound of a full alpha shift, the first one in 22 days. And then the sounds of combat changed quality entirely. She was at the far edge of the meadow when she saw them. 3 wolves on the ridge above, gray and disciplined, moving in the tight formation of military scouts. Not Hardy's wolves. The formation was wrong for Hardy's undisciplined hired fighters. This was trained movement, Reed's scouts. She stopped, stood in the open meadow with the suppressor brand fracturing along her neck, and her lungs burning and her hands beginning to glow. Very faintly, gold-white, the way they had in the shed when she'd healed Kale in the firelight and hadn't understood what she was looking at. One of the scouts shifted back to human form on the ridge above her. "Hold!" he called down, with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Identify yourself." She looked up at him. "My name is Noreen Wilson," she said, and her voice came out larger than it should have, resonant with something she'd never heard in it before. "I am traveling with your king. He is in the pass behind me, and he needs your people right now." The scout stared at her, at her hands, at the light. "Now," she said, "please." He turned and made a signal to the 2 shifted wolves behind him, a sharp double gesture, and they were gone. Over the ridge and south toward the pass at a speed that told her Reed had indeed been pulling forces south for days. She stood in the meadow and breathed. The suppressor brand cracked again, wider, and this time it did hurt. A deep, wrenching ache that went from her neck through her spine and into her chest, and she went to one knee on the grass and pressed her glowing hands flat against the earth and told herself, "Not yet, not yet, wait." Whatever was coming, whatever she was, whatever had been locked inside the brand Darren had put on her neck, it was going to come when it was ready, and she was going to meet it on her terms, not the meadows. She breathed. She waited. And in the pass behind her, the sounds of battle began to change. Chapter 9. She doesn't save him. They save each other. She stayed on one knee in the meadow for 4 minutes. She counted them. Not because she was afraid to move, because the thing pressing against the fractured suppressor brand was enormous and undirected, and she needed to understand it before she stood up with it, the way you needed to understand a wound's depth before you pressed on it. It felt like her wolf. Not the suppressed, diminished, allegedly Omega wolf she had been told she had, the thing she'd felt occasionally as a distant pressure behind the brand, manageable, ignorable. This felt like something that had been growing in the dark for a very long time and had used the darkness productively. She pressed her palms flat on the cold grass and felt the light from her hands soaking into the earth and felt the earth give something back, some steadying quality of deep cold and old patience, and she breathed until she could breathe evenly. Then she stood up. The pass was 40 seconds at a run. Reed's scouts had gone in ahead of her. She could hear it as she ran, the shift in the combat sound, fresh wolves entering the fight with the organized coordination of trained military wolves against Hardy's hired fighters. The numbers had changed. She went in anyway. The pass in combat was chaos organized into a narrow space, too tight for full tactical maneuvering, which she understood instinctively as an advantage for the defenders. Hardy's 8 wolves had been compressed into the pass's width and were fighting in a space that neutralized their numbers. Reed's 3 scouts had entered from behind her, compressing the fight further. She found Darren first. He was on the ground at the pass entrance, shifted back to human form, one hand pressed to his side. Not dead. She read that immediately, the rise and fall of his chest, the conscious tension in his jaw. Wounded. She crouched beside him without stopping to think about who he was. "Where?" she asked. "Side," he said through his teeth. "Silver-laced blade. Shallow." Silver-laced wounds didn't close on their own. She pressed his hand harder against the wound. "Keep pressure. Don't shift." She met his eyes. "Can you hold?" "Yes." She stood and moved deeper into the pass. Kale was at the center of it. She had seen him injured and recovering and carefully controlled for 22 days. She had not seen him in full form, at full strength, with nothing between him and what he was. He was extraordinary. Not in a way she had words for, not in a way that had anything to do with the firelight conversations and the bark-lined boots and the almost smile that appeared and disappeared too fast. This was something older and more fundamental, the specific authority of something that had evolved to lead, expressed completely without apology. He was also outnumbered. Hardy's remaining wolves, 5 still fighting, the scouts having taken down 3 at the rear, were coordinating now, pulling into a pattern. She recognized it, a containment formation designed to limit a single dominant wolf's ability to use its strength. It was working. Kale was holding them, but he was holding a position, not winning one. She walked into the center of the pass. She didn't shift. She didn't know if she could yet. The brand had fractured but not broken, and forcing it felt like the wrong approach. She did something else instead. She put her hands out, palms forward, and let the light come. It came differently than it had in the shed. In the shed, it had been careful, directed, a healer's application of something she'd been taught to keep small and controlled. This was not small. This was 22 days of sustained pressure against a fractured seal, and it came out like light through broken stone. Not a beam, but a flood, gold-white and warm and utterly without violence. But violence, she understood in this moment, was not the only thing wolves responded to. The 5 remaining wolves stopped, not because she'd hurt them, because what she was projecting was the biological opposite of a threat, a deep, primal signal that said, here is where the wounded come, here is where the broken are made whole, here is safety itself. And every wolf in the pass, Hardy's and Reed's and Kale's, received it in the oldest part of themselves and went still. Kale turned and looked at her. His eyes in full form were entirely gold, no silver, pure gold, lit from within, and they found her across the chaos of the pass and stayed. She held his gaze and kept her hands out and let the light do its work. 3 of Hardy's wolves shifted back to human form involuntarily, the signal too strong to fight in animal shape. The remaining 2 backed against the pass wall and stayed there, not fleeing, not fighting, waiting. Reed's scouts, better trained, held their positions but did not advance. The pass went quiet. "It's over," Noreen said into the silence, not loudly. She didn't need to be loud. "The king is alive. Whatever Hardy promised you, it won't be delivered. Leave the pass and you won't be pursued. Stay and fight and you will be." A long moment. The 2 wolves against the wall shifted back to human form. One of them, young, she noted, barely older than 20, with frightened eyes, looked at her hands and then at her face and said, "What are you?" She looked at him steadily. "I'm a healer," she said. "That's all." He left. The others followed. Reed's scouts let them go, watching Noreen for instruction, which told her something about how she must look right now that she filed away for later examination. Kale shifted back to human form. He did it a few feet from her, and she turned slightly to give him the privacy of the moment. Shifting was intimate, a dissolution and reassembly of self, and she had learned not to watch unless she was needed. When she turned back, he was standing in the pass in human form, with the kind of stillness that came after great exertion, breathing steadily. He looked at her hands. The light had faded, but faintly, very faintly, a warmth still emanated. "Blood Witch," he said. The word was quiet, almost reverent. She looked at her own hands. "Is that what this is?" "The rarest wolf-born gift," he said. "Born once in a generation, sometimes less. The ability to heal or destroy at the source. The life force itself." He paused. "Hardy's harvest operation." "Was never about your royal essence," she finished. "Or not only that." "The essence trail," he said. "It would transfer through prolonged contact, through wound treatment, through—" He stopped. "Through touch," she said. "My scent transferred to you, and they were following the Blood Witch trail." She breathed through this. "They were always coming for me." "Yes." She looked at him. "Darren rejected me and suppressed me because he sensed what I was. A Blood Witch in a pack is... The implications for pack power are significant," Kale said carefully. "A man who feared what you were would want it buried," she said. before anyone else noticed. She thought about the suppressor brand on her neck, the specific design of it, not a standard rejection seal, more complex. She'd thought it was elaborate ceremonial tradition. It had been designed to lock something specific. She had spent 2 weeks in an alley thinking she was nothing. He knew, she said, quietly. Yes, Cale said. She breathed through it, all of it. The public rejection, the brand, the 63 people watching, the alley, the 3 coins. The whole architecture of her diminishment, built on one man's fear of what she actually was. She breathed through it until it settled into something she could carry. Then she looked at Cale. Darren is wounded at the pass entrance. Silver-laced blade. I need supplies. He looked at her. You're going to heal him. Yes. He warned us, she said. He led us through the pass and he fought beside you. He made decisions that cost him. She held Cale's gaze. I'm a healer. That doesn't switch off. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Reed's forward camp is a mile north. They'll have a medical kit. Then we get Darren to the camp, she said, and then we go to Reed. Wilson Reed was not what she'd expected. She'd built a picture from Cale's descriptions. A senior general, the Northern Territory's most experienced military commander, and had imagined someone in Cale's register, austere and precise and economical. Reed was a broad-shouldered man in his 60s with a weathered face and the specific warmth of someone who had spent decades responsible for the lives of wolves younger than himself. He came out of his tent when they arrived at the camp and looked at Cale for a long moment without speaking. Then he said roughly, I told them you weren't dead. You were right, Cale said. Reed gripped his forearm in the old pack greeting, firm and held, and when he released it, his eyes were bright in the way of older men who had stopped being ashamed of what moved them. Then he looked at Noreen. She was aware of how she must look. Forest-worn, boots in poor repair, a fractured suppressor brand still visible on her neck, her hands still faintly luminous in a way she hadn't yet worked out how to fully shut off. Reed looked at her hands, looked at her face. His expression did something she hadn't expected. Not surprise, not calculation. Something like recognition. Blood Witch, he said, exactly as Cale had said it, with exactly the same quality. Apparently, she said. Reed looked at Cale. Cale met his look with the composed attention of a man waiting to see what someone he trusted would say. Reed looked back at Noreen. How long have you been traveling together? 22 days, she said. And you didn't know what she was? Reed said to Cale. It was not quite a question. I suspected, Cale said. From early. The healing in Millhaven was beyond standard herb work. The way the harvest wounds responded. He paused. I didn't tell her my suspicion. Reed looked at him with the expression of a man who had known him for many years and was choosing, in this moment, to say nothing. Which was itself a complete sentence. Sit down, Reed said to both of them. All of it. From the beginning. They told him everything. It took an hour, sitting in Reed's campaign tent with a proper fire and actual food, the first hot meal Noreen had eaten in 8 days, and Reed listened to all of it without interrupting, which she appreciated. When they finished, he was quiet for a moment. Hardy's timeline, he said, 13 days before the succession crisis becomes untenable. 11 now, Cale said. We lost 2 days in the terrain east of the Drove Road. 11, Reed said. I have 1,400 wolves pulled south. Jimenez at the coast garrison received Gale Blackwell's message 4 days ago. He'll be moving north and west. We can reach the capital in 8 days with combined forces. He looked at Cale. Hardy will know you're alive the moment we move. He'll accelerate. Let him, Cale said. Reed looked at him. He'll move against the outer packs who haven't committed. Pressure them to declare for him before you can reach them. Then we reach them first, Noreen said. Both men looked at her. Hardy's leverage over the uncommitted packs is that they don't know if the king is alive, she said. The moment they know, confirmed, not rumored, not reported through intermediary, that leverage disappears. If Cale sends direct word to each uncommitted council tonight before Hardy knows he's at Reed's camp, messengers through the night, Reed said. He was looking at her with the warm attention she was beginning to recognize from him before Hardy's scouts can report our position. By morning, Hardy is dealing with a realignment he didn't anticipate on a timeline he can't control, she said. Instead of us chasing his plan, he's chasing ours. Reed looked at Cale. Cale was looking at her. She's right, he said. I know she's right, Reed said. I'm looking at you looking at her. He stood up and picked up his campaign map. I'll have messengers ready within the hour. He moved to the tent entrance. The Blood Witch travels under my protection from this moment. My wolves know what she is. They'll respond accordingly. He paused at the opening. And someone find this woman proper boots before morning. He left. Noreen looked down at her boots. He seems... He is, Cale said. I like him. He will like hearing that. The corner of Cale's mouth, present longer this time. He'll pretend not to care that you said it. She looked at him. He was sitting across the campfire from her, firelight doing what firelight did to his eyes, and the 22 days sat between them and around them, and the 11 remaining days sat ahead of them, and he was looking at her with an openness he hadn't quite allowed before. Maybe because Reed's camp was the first place in 3 weeks that wasn't actively hostile, or maybe because something had shifted in the pass, in the light that had come from her hands, and the gold that had lit his eyes. Cale, she said. You said not in the middle of it, he said. I know what I said. He waited. I meant it, she said. I'm still meaning it. When this is done. She held his gaze. But I wanted you to know that the when is real. It's not a deflection. He was quiet for a moment. I know, he said. Do you? I have been reading you for 22 days, he said. I know the difference between your deflections and your intentions. A pause. You have very few deflections. She looked at the fire. That's probably a character flaw. No, he said quietly, it isn't. She let that sit. Outside the tent, Reed's camp was moving, organized, purposeful, the sound of a military force that had been waiting for direction and had now received it. Messengers being dispatched, wolves checking equipment, the particular energy of something large and long delayed beginning to move. She ate the rest of her meal and let herself, for the first time in 22 days, not be afraid of what was coming. Darren was in the camp's medical tent, his wound cleaned and dressed by Reed's healer, a young man named Sam Haynes, who had looked at Noreen's work on Cale's old injuries with the reverent attention of a student recognizing craftsmanship. She stopped at the tent entrance. Darren was awake. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had been rehearsing something and wasn't sure it was adequate. She saved him from it. Don't, she said. Whatever you were going to say, not tonight. You made the choices you made and I made mine and we're both still here, which is more than either of us deserved from today. She paused. When this is over, if you want to have that conversation, we'll have it. But not tonight. He looked at her for a moment. All right, he said. She turned to go. Noreen, he said. She stopped, didn't turn. I knew, he said, what you were. I felt it the first year, that there was something enormous in you. And I was afraid of it. A pause. That's not an excuse. I wanted you to know that it was never that you weren't enough. It was that you were too much. And I was too small for it. She stood in the tent entrance for a moment. I know, she said. I worked that out. She went back to the fire. Chapter 10. He offers her a throne. She asks for something else. The 8 days to the capital were nothing like the 22 days before them. There were roads. There was food. There were 1,400 wolves moving with the organized certainty of a force that knew its purpose, and at the center of that force, Cale moved like something restored to its correct context. Still quiet, still economical, still the person who had lined boots with bark in the dark without being asked, but fully himself in a way she had only seen in pieces before. She watched him and thought about the market square in Millhaven, the chains and the muzzle, and the crowd throwing pebbles, and felt a ferocity on his behalf that she didn't try to moderate. He caught her watching on the third day. What? He asked. Nothing, she said. He looked at her for a moment with the expression that meant he knew she was not telling him nothing. Then he let it go, which she appreciated. She was in Reed's war council every evening, which she had not expected and which Reed had arranged without asking her permission, simply putting a seat at the map table and looking at her when the others had settled, as though her presence there was the most natural thing. She earned the seat. She knew she did, not by deference, not by the blood witch light that made Reed's wolves go reverent and careful around her, but by the same thing that had made her a good healer, the ability to read what was actually there rather than what was convenient. Hardy's movements were not what they expected. He had not accelerated toward succession, as Reed had predicted, when the messengers reached the outer pack councils. Instead, he had gone still, a political stillness, the kind that preceded something large. Gail Blackwell, operating through her network of contacts, sent word on the 5th day that Hardy had moved the majority of his forces inside the capital walls. "He's not trying to win the outer territories," Noreen said, looking at the map. "He's conceding them. He's making the capital itself the prize." Reed looked at her. "If Kale can't enter the capital, the outer territory declarations don't matter," she said. "Hardy fortifies the royal seat, holds it long enough to produce a confirmed death through any means available, and dares the outer packs to wage a civil war to remove him." She traced the capital's position on the map. "The outer pack leaders won't want a civil war. They'll negotiate. Hardy gets a settlement." "She's right," Kale said. "So we don't give him time to make the capital impenetrable," Reed said. "We move faster. We also need what's inside the capital walls," Noreen said. "Hardy will have the royal council records, the physical seal of the crown. If he destroys those..." "He can't destroy the seal," Kale said. "It's bound to the royal line. It responds to blood, not possession." He paused. "It will respond to me the moment I'm within its range." "How far is its range?" she asked. "Half a mile," he said, "from the capital's center." She looked at the map. "Then we don't need inside the walls to prove your legitimacy," she said. "We need half a mile from the center. The seal responds publicly. Every wolf within range will feel it." Reed leaned over the map. "If we position forces on all 4 approach roads and you move to within half a mile of the center..." "Hardy's fortification becomes irrelevant," Kale finished. "The seal's response is the authority. The walls are just stone." Reed looked up. His eyes moved to Noreen, then to Kale, then back to the map. 4 days, he said. "We move in 4 days." They moved in 3. Jimenez's coastal garrison arrived a day early, 400 wolves, sea-worn and ready, joining Reed's force at the southern approach road. Bernard Allen came in from the west with 200 more, Gail Blackwell at his side looking satisfied in the way of someone whose network had performed exactly as intended. The capital was called Iron Gate, and it rose on the horizon of the 8th morning like something that had been waiting. Noreen rode beside Kale at the head of the column and looked at it and felt the suppressor brand on her neck pulse once, deeply. A recognition or a warning, she couldn't tell which. Kale felt it. He turned to look at her neck. "It's responding to the proximity," he said quietly. "Your blood witch ability. The capital's old wards are sensing it. Is that a problem?" "No," he said. "It's the opposite of a problem." He paused. "The wards were designed to recognize blood witches. They're a protection mechanism. The last one to pass through Iron Gate's gates was..." He stopped. "When?" she asked. "My grandmother," he said. "She was blood witch. It's how the gift passes. Through royal bloodlines, occasionally, skipping generations, presenting in those outside the line when it..." He stopped again. She looked at him. "When it finds its match," he said very carefully. She held his gaze for a moment. "After," she said. "After," he agreed, the corner of his mouth. Present and held this time, long enough to be real. She turned back to face Iron Gate and told her pulse to settle. The approach to the half-mile mark took an hour of careful positioning. Reed's forces spreading across the 4 approach roads with the quiet efficiency of a force that had been preparing for this moment for 8 days. Hardy's wolves on the walls watched the deployment and did not sortie, which confirmed what she'd suspected. Hardy had not planned for this approach. He'd fortified against a siege, not against a seal response. Cale rode forward alone from the column's head. Noreen moved to follow. He stopped, looked back at her. "I'm coming," she said. "I know," he said, and didn't argue. They rode together to the half-mile mark on the northern approach road, where the capital's main gate was visible ahead, and Hardy's wolves were visible on the walls above it, and Cale stopped his horse and sat quietly for a moment. She watched his face. He reached into his coat and withdrew something she hadn't seen before, a small, flat disc of dark metal, the size of her palm, bearing the crown mark in relief. He held it loosely, not gripping, just holding. Then he pressed it once against the inside of his wrist, the wrist where the suppressor mark had been, and she felt it before she heard it. A deep vibration, not audible but physical, moving through the ground and the air simultaneously, like something enormous exhaling after a very long-held breath. The capital's old wards, recognizing what they were built to recognize. It rolled outward from the center of Irongate in concentric waves. She could see it in the reactions of the wolves on the walls, each one touched by it in sequence as it passed. Heads coming up, bodies stilling, the involuntary response of wolves receiving something old and irrefutable. And behind her, Reed's 1,400 wolves and Jimenez's 400 and Allen's 200, every one of them receiving the same wave, everyone going to a knee in the same moment, the massive sound of it like a tide going out all at once. The gates of Irongate opened. Not immediately. There was a long pause, long enough for something to be decided inside, long enough for Hardy's calculation to run its course and arrive at its conclusion. Then the massive iron gates swung outward, slowly, and the Royal Council emerged in formal procession. Not Hardy, not yet, but the council members who had been his allies, who were now doing the first thing political animals always did when the weight shifted. They were coming to be on the right side of it. Hardy came last. He walked out of Irongate's gate on his own feet, which she respected, and stopped 50 yards from where Cale sat on his horse. He was a lean man of middle age, with the kind of face that had learned to show precisely what it intended and nothing else, and he looked at Cale with an expression that had moved past calculation into something she read as a strange, grim relief, like a man who had been holding something very heavy and had finally been allowed to put it down. "My king," he said, his voice carried. "Roger," Cale said. A long silence. Hardy looked at Noreen, at the fractured suppressor brand on her neck, at the faint luminosity that she'd stopped trying to suppress. His expression moved through recognition, and then something she hadn't expected. Fear. Not of her. She understood, looking at him, that he'd known. That the harvest operation, the coup, the careful 22 days of hunting, all of it had been about reaching her before she reached Cale, before the bond between a king and his blood-witch mate completed. He had been too late by 3 coins. He said nothing else. He stood in the road while Reed's wolves came forward to take him into custody, and he didn't resist. And Noreen watched and felt nothing she'd expected to feel, and everything she should. Irongate was exactly as large and formal and ancient as she'd imagined it. The Royal Council chamber, the one Hardy had occupied, the one Cale had been removed from, was a room with stone floors and high rafters that she recognized from a dream she'd had weeks ago, and when she walked into it for the first time, she stopped in the doorway for a moment and breathed. Cale stopped beside her. "The dream," he said. "Yes. I told you," he said quietly. "The same place, different perspective." She had thought about that sentence, in the forest and on the road and in Reed's campaign tent. She thought about it again now. "You dreamed you were on the throne," she said, "and I wasn't outside the circle." "You were beside it," he said. "That was the difference." She looked at him. He looked back at her, and she could see in his face all 23 days at once. The market square and the shed and the forest and the pass and the meadow and the firelight. And it was not overwhelming. It was simply true. "After," she reminded him. "We're after," he said. She looked around at the council chamber. "This is still very much the middle of it." "The formal work, yes," he said. "The rest of it, Hardy is in custody. The seal has responded. The council is realigning. Reed is handling the disposition of forces. He paused. The part that was us running is over. She considered this. All right, she said, but you still have a council to address and a throne to formally reclaim, and approximately 200 wolves waiting in the approach road who will need to be— Noreen. She stopped. I have been waiting 23 days, he said very quietly, to say something without an active crisis attached to it. She looked at him. I know you, he said. Not the file. Not the registered healer from Duskfall territory. I know that you count things when you're afraid. I know you talk to yourself in the dark. I know you're fiercer when you have nothing than you were when you had everything, and you don't realize that's remarkable. I know you chose, twice, to open a door you didn't have to open and walk through it when anyone else would have turned back. He paused. I know that you are the most extraordinary person I have been in proximity to in my entire life, and I have been in proximity to a considerable number of people. The council chamber was very quiet. That's a high bar, she said, because something had to be said, and her voice had decided this was what it was saying. It is, he agreed. You clear it significantly. She breathed. You're the Alpha King, she said. I'm a rejected Omega from a small border pack with a fractured suppressor mark and boots that are— Yours were replaced, he said. Reed's orders, 3 days ago. She looked down. She was wearing new boots. She had been wearing new boots for 3 days and had been too focused on council maps and Hardy's movements to register it. She pressed her fingers to her eyes for a moment. I'm a blood witch, she said from behind her fingers, who didn't know she was a blood witch until a week ago and still doesn't fully know what that means or how to— The light. I can't always control the— I know, he said. We'll learn it. She lowered her hands. We, she said. Yes, he said, simply, without performance. She looked at him for a long moment. At this man she had bought at auction with 3 coins in an alley when she had nothing, and had walked through 23 days of difficult country with, and had argued with about the meaning of the words same thing, and had sat across fires from, and had learned, in the specific way you learned the people you paid close attention to, down to the details. After involves a great number of practical complications, she said. Yes. The council will have opinions. They will. Reed will have opinions. Reed already has opinions. He's been expressing them indirectly for 4 days. And Darren's pack will be handled appropriately, he said. All of it will be handled. None of it tonight. He held her gaze. Tonight I am asking you one question, and I would like a simple answer. She waited. Are you staying? He asked. Not will you be my queen, not will you stand beside the throne, not the formal, enormous, world-altering question with all its implications arranged around it. Are you staying? The question of a person asking another person, are you choosing this, choosing me, without the crisis to justify it? She thought about 3 coins in an alley, about a door held shut against a pack of wolves, about bark in her boots and a half-smile that lasted longer each time, and the specific warmth of a hand on her shoulder in the dark. Yes, she said. The formal reclamation took place in the council chamber the following morning. Reed had arranged it with characteristic efficiency. Council members in their places, Jimenez and Allen flanking the chamber entrance, Gail Blackwell in the back with the satisfied expression of someone whose network had delivered on every count. The formal documents, the seal acknowledgement, the Crown authority transfer. All of it correct, witnessed, recorded. Noreen stood to the right of the throne and slightly back because that had been her instinct and she had learned to trust her instincts, and because standing beside something was different from standing in front of it. When the formal proceedings completed and the chamber acknowledged Cale's reclaimed authority, he did the thing Noreen had not expected. He turned to face her. In front of the council, in front of Reed and Jimenez and Allen and Gale, and 200 wolves in the approach road whose attention was on the open chamber doors. There is one more matter of formal record, he said. His voice carried. It always carried, but in the stone acoustics of the council chamber, it went to every corner without effort. The chamber was still. Noreen Wilson of the former Duskfall territory is a blood witch of the royal line's recognition, he said. The suppressor mark placed on her by Darren McCoy of Duskfall was an illegal sealing of a blood witch's gifts, which carries the penalty of full territorial forfeiture under Crown law. He paused. The mark is dissolved by Crown authority, recorded, and the record will stand in every Pack Council's archive in every territory under my rule. He looked at her. Come here, he said, quietly, only for her. She crossed the chamber floor and stood in front of him, and he reached up and pressed 2 fingers to the fracture lines of the suppressor brand on her neck and spoke a word in the old formal language that she felt more than heard. The brand dissolved. Not the gradual fading of Kale's wrist mark. This was immediate. The burn scar lifted from her skin and was simply gone, leaving nothing behind, not even a tender spot. Clean erasure. And her wolf rose, silver white and enormous and fully, finally, completely herself. Not the terrifying, uncontrolled flood she'd been afraid of, but something natural and inevitable, like breathing out after holding your breath for a very long time. The Blood Witch light came with it, gold white and warm, flowing outward from her hands and the space around her. Every wolf in the chamber received it. She heard Reed make a sound, low, involuntary, the sound of a wolf receiving something it had not expected. She heard the murmur move through the chamber and out to the approach road where the waiting wolves received the edge of it. Then it settled, and she was simply herself, standing in the council chamber of Irongate, with the bond between herself and the king she'd bought at auction 23 days ago, completed and real and ancient. And the chamber was on its knees. Not at his command, not out of protocol, but because what they were receiving was the rarest thing their world produced, and their bodies knew it. The oldest council member, a woman named Dorothy MacDonald, white-haired and precise, who had sat on the Royal Council for 30 years, looked at Noreen from her kneeling position and said, with the gravity of someone making a formal attestation, "Blood Witch and King. The old pairing. The old pairing," Reed echoed from the back of the chamber in a voice that was not entirely steady. Noreen looked at all of it. The council chamber and the formal rows and the kneeling wolves and the open doors and the morning light coming through the high windows of Irongate, the city that had been on the wrong side of the right history for 23 days. She looked at Kale beside her. He was looking at her with an expression she had no remaining category problems with. She knew it completely. She had been learning it across 23 days of fires and forests and difficult country, and she knew it now the way she knew the depth of a wound by touch. Certain, accurate, without doubt. "Now what?" she asked, and Kale smiled, fully, completely, the real one she had been seeing pieces of for 3 weeks, and said, "Now everything." Epilogue. 3 months later. The formal dissolution of the Duskfall Pack's political standing took 6 weeks to process through the Outer Council archive system, which was 6 weeks fewer than Noreen had originally predicted, and, as she told Reed, a minor miracle of administrative efficiency. Darren appeared before the Crown Authority Tribunal in the 4th week. He told the truth, which she had not been entirely certain he would do. His testimony implicated 12 additional PAC leaders in Hardy's network and resulted in the largest coordinated PAC restructuring in a generation. He was stripped of his alpha standing and given a middle-rank position in a small Eastern Territory PAC under the supervision of a council-appointed overseer. It was not a generous outcome, it was a fair one. He did not contest it. Hardy's trial was formal, lengthy, and attended by representatives from every PAC territory. He was convicted on charges of illegal royal suppression, conspiracy against the crown, illegal harvesting, and a list of secondary charges that took the tribunal recorder the better part of an afternoon to read into the record. The sentence was permanent suppression and lifelong exile to the northern border territories. When the sentence was read, Hardy looked at Noreen. She looked back. She did not look away first, and she did not look away second either. She simply held his gaze until he dropped it, and then she turned back to the tribunal, and that was the end of that. Gail Blackwell was appointed Director of Crown Intelligence, which everyone who had spent any time with her agreed was simply making official what had already been practically true. Bernard Allen returned to the Western Territories with a formal commendation and a relaxation of the border restrictions that had complicated his region's trade for a decade. He sent Noreen a letter 3 months after the reclamation that consisted mostly of strategic analysis and ended with a single line. "The old pairing holds. We are glad of it." Wilson Reed refused every formal title offered and accepted the informal role of doing whatever he had always done, which was managing the military affairs of the Northern Territory and attending war councils and expressing opinions in the careful, loaded silences of a man who had earned the right to be listened to. He visited Iron Gate in the second month and brought Noreen, without explanation, a copy of an ancient text on Blood Witch history that he had apparently been carrying in his campaign pack for 30 years. "My grandmother's," he said. "She believed the gift would return in our time. She made me promise to give this to the Blood Witch when she came." He paused. "She didn't specify it would be under these circumstances." Noreen looked at the text, looked at Reed. "She sounds like she was very certain about things," she said. "She was never wrong," Reed said, which was both impressive and deeply inconvenient. He turned to leave, stopped. "You're good for him." She looked at him. "I've known him since he was 12 years old," Reed said. "He was always capable. He was never—" He searched for the word. "He was never easy in himself. Not like this." He looked at the floor briefly. "That's all I wanted to say." He left before she could respond. She stood in the corridor of Iron Gate for a moment and breathed. Josie Friedman received a Crown Commendation for services rendered to the king during the period of crisis, the formal wording of which she found, in her own words, quite something, and a grant of permanent market stall rights that exempted her from the standard rotation fee for the remainder of her trading life. She sent a letter back. The letter said, "I gave a key to a woman with nothing and 3 good reasons, and she spent it well. That's all the commending that needs doing. The stall rights are very welcome, thank you." Noreen kept the letter. Sam Haynes, Reed's camp healer, requested a formal apprenticeship with the Crown Healers Authority. His application landed on Noreen's desk because, as it turned out, the Blood Witch was also, by tradition and historical precedent, the Crown Healer, something Dorothy MacDonald had noted with the mild satisfaction of someone correcting a long-standing administrative oversight. Noreen read his application and the notes Reed had included on his work and approved it the same afternoon. She also approved 12 other applications from healers in outer territories who had been working without formal recognition, a paper backlog that had accumulated over Hardy's tenure, during which Crown healer appointments had been quietly deprioritized. She cleared the backlog in a week. Reed, hearing about this, said nothing. His expression said everything. The suppressor brand's scar, which she'd been told would disappear completely, left behind a faint, almost invisible line on the side of her neck. Just the outline. The brand itself was gone. She looked at it in the glass on the morning of the 3rd month and thought about keeping it covered. Then she decided not to. It was not a mark of shame. It was a map of where she'd been, and where she'd been had led her here, and she was not going to pretend the road hadn't existed to make the destination look cleaner. Cale found her looking at it. He came to stand behind her in the glass and looked at it too, and she watched his expression, the thing that moved through it, the guilt that was still there 3 months later, which she had decided not to try to argue him out of because some things needed to be carried a while before they could be set down. "It's not a wound," she said. "I know." "It's a line on a map," she said. "That's all." He put his hand on her shoulder. She covered it with hers. On the morning of the 4th month, on a day when the light came through Iron Gate's high windows at an angle that turned the stone floor gold, Cale found her in the small room off the council chamber that she had claimed for her healer's work. Herb bundles drying from the ceiling, the smell of pine resin, and something green and medicinal. A table covered in notes for the Crown Healers Authority reorganization. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, reading the text Reed had given her, which was dense and archaic and fascinating in the way of things that described you to yourself. He sat down on the floor across from her. She looked up. "You're sitting on the floor," she said. "You're on the floor," he said. "This is where the conversation is." She looked at him. He was holding something, a small flat box, plain, no ornamentation. He set it on the floor between them. She looked at it, looked at him. "What is this?" "Open it," he said. Inside the box was a ring, simple, dark metal, no gemstone, bearing on its inner face the crown mark in the same relief as the seal disc she had seen him use at the Capitol's half-mile mark. She looked at it for a long time. "This is not," she said carefully, "a throne offer." "No," he agreed. "The throne is a separate and considerably more complicated conversation involving the council and Dorothy MacDonald and approximately 4 months of formal proceedings." He paused. "This is a simpler question." She looked up at him. "Are you staying?" he asked. The same question, the one from the council chamber doorway, the one that had always been about choice rather than obligation, about this person rather than this position. "You're going to keep asking me that," she said. "I am going to keep asking you that," he agreed, "until the answer changes, which I understand it never will, but the asking matters to me." She looked at the ring, looked at him. She thought about 3 coins and a market square, and a very large wolf who had sat down like a mountain when she'd told him to go, and all the country between that moment and this floor. She picked up the ring. "Yes," she said, "I'm staying." He took the ring from her and slid it onto her finger, and she let him, sitting cross-legged on the floor of her healer's room, with herb bundles drying above them and the morning light coming through the window. And it was nothing like the formal ceremony the council would eventually require, and everything like what it actually was. She went back to her book. He stayed on the floor. After a while, he picked up a stack of her reorganization notes and began reading them, because there was work to do and the floor was as good a place as any to do it. And so, dear viewers, we close the book on Noreen, a woman who had nothing left, spent it anyway, and turned out to be everything. Before you go, I want to leave you with one question to sit with. If someone had buried your greatest gift just to keep you small, would you have spent your last 3 coins on a stranger, or would you have kept them for yourself? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story moved you even a little, the like button is still waiting. It costs you nothing and means everything to a small channel that pours its whole heart into every story. Until next time.